Hey friends, before we dive into tonight's story, did you know that nearly 80% of viewers aren't subscribed? If you're enjoying this content, hit that subscribe button. It really helps keep these long stories coming. Also, for even more police horror stories, check out my new channel. The link's in the description and pinned comment. I'd love it if you stop by and subscribe. I'd love to hear from you. What time is it where you are, and which city are you listening from tonight? Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into it. I still hear Brutus's nails scraping the gravel edge of Old Mill Road every time I close my eyes. It began just after 2 a.m., when the fog drifted in thicker than usual, swallowing the beams of the patrol truck's headlights like gray smoke. I'd been on the force for 6 years, K, 9 handler for 4, and I'd learned to read the night as if it spoke a language only some of us could hear. Brutus, solid muscle beneath a sable coat, was more than a partner. He was my constant echo of instinct. Every cough from his throat was a syllable in a warning I could neither ignore nor fully translate. Dispatch had flagged a suspicious vehicle call. A lone Silverado parked beside an abandoned warehouse yard just beyond the township limits. Plate flagged for erratic driving, possible DUI, maybe narcotics. A routine check, they said. Unit 17, confirm 2 a.m. check at grid 05, crackled the radio. The fog made every sound warped. Voices stretched into the silence, and the radio itself cast static like distant thunder. I clipped Brutus into his harness, felt the metal buckle's weight transfer from my hand straight into his tense shoulders. He tilted his head and wheezed out a single bark, the breath visible in the chill air. We stepped onto the gravel shoulder together. The warehouse was just a hulking silhouette, corrugated metal walls pocked by rust and time. The ground sloped toward an old loading dock, broken planks like splintered ribs. Every flashlight sweep across the damp asphalt threw brilliant reflections, red and blue LEDs pulsing in the moisture. Brutus's paws left prints that vanished behind us, then reappeared in front, as if the road itself was a mirror for his passage. "Police," I called to the darkness. "You in there? Step out slow." No response except the rat-a-tat of my own heartbeat. Brutus sniffed at the driver's side door of the Silverado. The window was down an inch, cheap trick to clear fog inside. He nosed his way closer, fur rippling, then froze. His body tensed as though he'd hit a brick. I flicked my light to the undercarriage, smears of darkened fluid trailing back to the warehouse door. I stepped forward, the beam barely illuminating a narrow path of disturbed gravel. Then Brutus gave a low growl that rumbled from deep in his chest. The warehouse shutter was only half open, a crooked grin of metal teeth. As I approached, the stench of stale oil and rot seeped out. My flashlight flickered, then steadied. I whispered, "Stay," and felt his harness slacken as he obeyed. Static hissed on the radio. "Unit 17, anything?" I pressed the transmit button, voice tight. Nothing. Then, "Cop?" A fragment of another call drifted in. I thought I heard someone say, "Over," but the signal faded again, replaced by hiss. I stepped under the awning and into the yawning mouth of the warehouse. Brutus at my side, ears flat, tail low but rigid. My light scanned defeated crates, toppled pallets, tarps clinging to exposed steel, girders. Somewhere deep inside, I felt a pulse of dread bloom in my gut. Brutus's hackles rose. His panting quickened. I crouched and saw it first. A small white sneaker buried in damp straw, the laces frayed and stained. Then came the smear of dark red along a crate's edge. Blood, still wet enough to glimmer. I shoved the radio to my shoulder. "Dispatch, suspect unknown, Possible victim, officer down. My words trembled. No reply. I tapped the mic again, fists tightening. The silence into which I spoke was cavernous, like my own doubt echoing back. Brutus leaned forward, stiff-legged, head low. He sniffed the air, snarled at a dark gap where crates formed a makeshift alley. I took a step. The floorboards beneath me creaked. My flashlight slipped, beam dancing across concrete scars. Then I saw it, footprints pressing into the cold earth beyond the pallets. Bare, smeared with grit and glistening moisture. No toes, no heels, just smudges, ending suddenly at a seam in the floor. "Brutus," I whispered. He turned, nose twitching, eyes reflecting my light. Then he barked once, loud and urgent, as though something stirred just out of sight. I shone the beam toward the seam, and there it was. A rusty metal panel slightly ajar, the gap too narrow for me but wide enough for Brutus to squeeze through. His bark echoed, then cut off abruptly. My stomach dropped. The panel slid shut with a damp thud, rattling the overhead girders. I lunged forward but tripped over a loose board. The beam swung, catching on the warehouse wall, nothing but scrawled graffiti and shadows. Brutus's bark came again, faint but insistent, behind the sealed panel. My hand hit the cold metal, fingertips pressing against swollen panels. I dug for the wheel release but found none. The only response was Brutus whining, muffled now, pressing his head against the other side. My radio sparked to life. "Unit 17? Status?" The voice was clipped, panicked. I swallowed. "I found signs of blood. Brutus he's inside that panel." My pulse thundered. A distant siren wailed, but no backup lights appeared outside. The fog had rolled in, thick as wool, swallowing sound and sight. I pounded the panel, shouted Brutus's name, but my voice was swallowed, met by only silence and the dog's uneasy panting. Seconds stretched like hours. Then the panel creaked, shifting just enough for me to slip a hand through. I felt fur, wet and trembling, and something cold brushed against my wrist. Brutus's paw, a thick, pulsating warmth. I tried to pull, but the gap collapsed, metal scraping bone. I cursed and yanked, wrenching the panel open a crack. Light spilled in from behind. His eyes shone, wide, frantic, reflecting terror I'd never seen in him before. But just as quickly as he emerged, the floorboard gave way under both of us, and we plummeted into darkness. The world flipped, my ribs cracked against wood. My flashlight went flying, clattering on unseen debris. Brutus let out a yelp that cut through the dead radio static. We landed in something wet. The stench of metal and rot hit me full in the lungs. My left arm went numb. In the silence that followed, only the drip of water and Brutus's heavy panting in the blackness remained. Then, a single bark, sharp, unsure, echoed off walls I couldn't see. And somewhere above, the shutter creaked shut. I still feel the chill of that night down to my bones, a cold that no uniform or backup heater could ever drive away. It was just past 2 a.m., the kind of late hour when the world outside patrol feels like a half-remembered dream, all edges smudged by fog and fatigue. Brutus sat in the passenger seat, taut as spring steel, ears swiveling for any hint of movement. I'd been on the Portland force 6 years, partnered with this dog nearly 4, and we'd grown into a single living instrument of instinct and routine. On most nights, that partnership was enough to carry us through the silent stretches. But this night, the night everything went sideways, carved itself into my memory the moment the call came through. Unit 17. Suspicious vehicle at grid 05. Dispatch crackled. The voice was flat, professional, but the static tangled with a low undercurrent of urgency. I eased the rig onto the gravel shoulder of Old Mill Road, where the blacktop split and the warehouse lots began. Ramshackle, overgrown, abandoned since some long-past boom left them empty husks under the moon. The headlights of my patrol truck cut twin beams into the fog, pale fingers probing the murk ahead. Every drop of moisture clung to metal and asphalt like frosting on cake. The red and blue LEDs shimmered across puddles, each pulse rippling outward before the gloom swallowed it again. I clipped Brutus's leash into his harness. The metal clip made a soft clink, and I swear I heard it louder than any other sound on Earth. He gave a single bark, tight and low, different from his usual greeting. That bark meant he was locked in. This was no traffic stop or dog in park call. Something about that vehicle had already set his senses ablaze. The Silverado was parked under a collapsed overhang, paint flaking, windshield smeared with rain dust. Its tailgate was closed, one taillight shattered. I flicked on my flashlight and stepped closer, boots scraping gravel. Brutus jumped down, paws compacting the stones into half-prints that vanished as soon as they formed. He nosed the rear bumper, neck muscles rippling beneath matted fur. I held his leash loose, letting him lead while keeping my eyes peeled for a driver or passenger. The cab was empty. No IDs on the seat, no open doors. Just vacancy. "Police," I called, voice echoing against cold metal. "Anyone here? Show yourself." Brutus's hackles rose. His panting quickened. A second bark, urgent, rattled in my chest like a warning bell. I followed him around to the driver's side. The window was down by a hair's breadth. Just enough to clear condensation, but not enough for a person. He sniffed there, muzzle passing through stagnant air. My beam traced a smeared pattern on the doorframe, brownish red dried into cracks in the paint. I swallowed, pinch of bile burning my throat. Dispatch, possible sign of injury, request backup. My fingers fumbled the radio controls as Brutus nosed further under the truck, whine pressing at his throat. I shone the light under the chassis. A dark smear coated the metal beams. My jaw clenched. Blood, fresh enough that it glimmered where the light hit it. Then Brutus froze, hackles stiff, nose pointing toward the warehouse entrance. The loading dock was a gaping maw, boards warped, supports buckling, a yawning opening that led into pure black. My light flickered as I stepped onto the rotten wood planks. Each board groaned underfoot, and I could taste the damp rot in the air, like a tomb long sealed. I muttered, "Stay," though I wasn't sure if he'd obey. He stood, shadowed by the dock roof, rigid and alert. I squared my shoulders and moved forward. Inside, the warehouse swallowed our lights, turning every flicker into a distant reflection. My flashlight beam glinted off broken glass, bounced off rust-streaked walls. Crates lay toppled, their contents spilled. Empty bottles, shredded boxes, and something small and white resting in a puddle of oily water. I crouched. It was a rubber glove, a child's medical glove, stained pink around the fingers. I felt a cold spike behind my ribs. Brutus whined low, ear tips twitching. The floor sloped downward, pooling water at a seam where the concrete gave way to dirt. Footprints pressed into the mud, bare, smeared with grit and blood. No heel or toe marks, just smudges, as though someone had knelt or crawled. I thumbed my mic. "Dispatch, footprints, no shoes, possible victim. Need EMS static answered. Only static." My pulse drummed in my ears as Brutus nosed toward a dark corridor formed by stacked pallets. My flashlight picked out tape, police evidence tape, yellow and frayed, wrapped around a rusted support beam, fluttering like dirty gauze. I blinked, then crouched to see if it was new. The edges were slick with moisture, and one corner bore a fingerprint in dried mud. Someone had been here before me. Someone had left breadcrumbs in blood. Brutus let out a bark, hard, staccato, pointing at a steel door set into the far wall. The door's handle was bent, as though twisted by force, and a narrow gap at its bottom revealed darkness that shimmered if you stared too long. I stepped closer, heart hammering. The metal was ice cold against my palm as I reached for the handle. Before I touched it, a noise, thump, echoed from somewhere deeper inside, like a foot dropping onto a metal plate. I froze. Brutus's hackles rose, hair on his shoulders standing. His panting slowed, deliberate, as he listened. My radio crackled. Unit 17, respond. The voice was garbled, urgent. I jabbed the button. Go ahead. Multiple units en route, the dispatcher said. Reports of shots fired at 5 grid. Definition unclear. Sit tight. My stomach nodded. Shots fired? This was bigger than we thought. Brutus lunged forward, leash taut. I stumbled after him as he nosed the door's gap, then froze stiff as a corpse. His body rigid, tail straight out, nose quivering. I grabbed his leash and yanked him back. Easy, boy, I muttered. He shook like a spring winding down, but his gaze never left the door. Behind us, the warehouse floor groaned, wood creaking under weight unseen. I swung my light to the ceiling. Rafters sagged, wires dangling from broken lights, thick webs draped across girders. The air smelled of grease, rot, and something coppery that made my throat itch. A slow drip somewhere sounded like a heartbeat echoing through the cavern. I pressed my back against the door, hand still on the handle. Brutus whined, head low, trembling. I flicked off my light. Better to rely on night vision now. Everything turned green, ghostly. The footprint. Smudges on the floor ahead looked alive, like they might shift at any moment. My heart pounded so loudly I thought it would give me away. The handle clicked under my fingers. I twisted, half expecting it to be locked, but it swung inward smoothly, revealing a narrow stairwell descending into deeper darkness. Each step was worn, edges rounded, dust settled in the groove. Brutus squeezed by my leg, nose first, ears alert. I dropped low and followed, every sense screaming that we were stepping into something wrong. At the bottom, the corridor stretched out, concrete walls lined with pipes that dripped black water into shallow pools along the floor. The flashlight beam carved a path, illuminating irregular patches of damp blotting the walls. Something scuttled across the pipe above, metal rings sliding like chains rattling overhead. Brutus growled, a low rumble that set my own nerves on edge. We rounded a corner into a larger room. Dim red LEDs from an emergency panel flickered overhead. 2 lights blinking lazily, as though in no rush to stay lit. The panel's plastic cover was shattered, wires exposed like bleeding veins, and beneath it lay a scattering of papers soaked through. Old ledger pages, smudged handwriting, and what looked like a blueprint of the warehouse. Dots marking rooms long since sealed. I stepped in, boots echoing on cracked concrete. Brutus darted ahead, then skidded to a halt. The far wall, bare except for rust patches, holding a single small projection of something momentary. My own shadow, stretched tall and twisted, as if I'd been draped over with someone else's nightmares. I blinked, and the shadow morphed back when I stepped forward. But the hairs on my neck stood up. A low thump sounded, like a fist against metal, coming from the corridor we'd left. Brutus's head snapped around. He barked once, urgent. I raced back toward the stairwell, mind bursting with questions. What had we found? Who left that evidence tape? Why the shots at the site? And most importantly, what had just moved in the shadows behind me. The stairwell mouth yawned in front of us. I shone the flashlight upward, saw nothing but the dark frame. But to my left, down the hallway we'd come, the emergency lights dimmed further, flickered once, then cut out altogether, plunging everything into green night vision gloom. Brutus barked twice. I froze as the sound echoed, then died. In that instant of silence, I realized that whatever had slammed those crates earlier, whatever dragged those papers and marked those prints, was still here, watching, waiting. I swallowed, heart pounding, as Brutus nosed past me toward the darkness below. My radio squawked with static, then a lone phrase. "Are you okay?" The corridor behind me answered with nothing but the echo of a dripping pipe. And then the stairwell door slammed shut, cutting off my escape with a deafening crack. The world collapsed into a cascade of muffled noises as the stairwell door slammed shut. Metal on metal, echoing like a gunshot in the hollow belly of the building. Brutus and I tumbled backward, paws and boots slipping in wet grit. My flashlight skidded across the floor, its beam dancing wildly before settling on the warped stair tread, reflecting off something glinting at the top of the steps. A pair of leather gloves, one finger torn, streaked with dark red. My pulse spiked. I snatched them up, half expecting them to burn in my hand. They were cold, crisp as parchment, and the red looked almost too perfect, like art. I swallowed and jabbed at the radio. "Dispatch, entry point sealed. Request immediate assistance." No response, only static rasping back. The entire building felt alive with silence. Brutus stood with his hackles raised, tail rigid, eyes flicking between me and the doorway that now refused to open. He let out a single, low growl. An alarm shot halfway between warning and plea. My hand went back to the door's release bar, but it was locked tight. Whoever had closed it from the outside had done it deliberately, and with force. Panic prickled at the nape of my neck. I looked around the landing. The only alternative was the corridor we'd come from. Empty now except for the scattered papers, and that mocked projection of my own twisted silhouette on the far wall. I took a breath, slow, deliberate, and pivoted. Brutus slipped in beside me, body pressed close. Together we retraced our steps down the hall, the beam catching dripping pipes that arched overhead, each drop resonating like distant footsteps. I reflexively scanned for movement, but found none beyond the quivering reflections in the puddles. The air was close, humid, as though the building exhaled in slow, measured breaths around us. At the corridor's end, the stairwell mouth yawned black, the broken emergency LEDs sputtering, then flaring red for a heartbeat before retreating into nothing. My flashlight revealed footprints in the corner, bare prints smeared in blood and dust, leading away from the stairwell toward, of all things, a makeshift office, its door marked by a crude scrawl of letters in blood, RESULT. The letters looked fresh, the strokes unsteady, as if written by someone collapsing under their own weight. I gripped Brutus's leash tighter. "Stay close, buddy." He slid between my legs, a living barrier. The office door hung ajar. I eased it open, heart pounding so loudly I thought it would betray me. Inside, overturned furniture created a crater of chaos. Papers fluttered on the desk, police reports, suspect sketches, property records, mixed with photos printed on glossy paper. My stomach lurched when I recognized one, a grainy image of that abandoned warehouse exterior, with the Silverado parked out front. Only this print was dated 2 weeks ago. Below it, in neat, precise script, someone had written, "Test subject." I felt Brutus stiffen. He let out a single bark that rattled in my bones. I shone the light across the wall beside the desk. More photos pinned in a grid, each featuring different scenes of our precinct's jurisdiction. Forest trails, farmland culverts, empty highways. Each had footprints circled in red, and narrow notes scrawled, "Interrupted, no capture, repeat." At the center of the grid was a photograph of me, taken from behind as I clipped Brutus into his harness outside the precinct, date stamped that very morning. A cold weight settled in my chest. Someone had been watching us. Someone had known our routines, our calls, our routes, and they'd lured us here on purpose. My radio crackled. "Unit 17, status." The same voice, now frantic. Relief and dread tangled in my throat. I tapped the mic. "I'm alive. Brutus and I are secure in an unknown location. Send units to grid 05, immediate extraction." Static crackled, then silence again. Seconds passed like hours. Then came the softest sound, the click of a camera shutter. I swung my light toward Brutus, then back to the wall. There, hovering in the beam's edge, was another photo. Fresh, its edges curling. A close-up of Brutus's face, eyes wide, muzzle quivering. Beneath it, one word, in dripping blood, "exposed." Brutus began to whine, low and uncertain, the sound vibrating through my own bones. I knelt and pressed my hand to the floor, feeling grit and moisture seep into my palm. The office door creaked behind me, swinging outward on rusted hinges. No wind, no one pushing. Just the promise of someone, or something, stepping in. I rose slowly, flashlight sweeping. The corridor's shadows seemed to stretch. Elongated fingers pointing down the hall. Brutus barked twice, a warning to remain still. We were out of time. The echo of boots on metal steps drifted closer, accompanied by the distant hum of multiple sirens now audible beyond the warehouse walls. Backup had arrived at last. Yet, as I moved toward the office door, the beam caught something behind me. Footprints. Bare, wide, and smeared. Leading not back to the stairwell, but deeper into the warehouse, toward areas we hadn't yet explored. And at the very end of those prints, a single set of small, dirty paw prints moving away from the room, as though something four-legged had slipped past us, vanishing into the darkness. My heart hammered. My voice caught in my throat as I realized whatever hunted us that night had marked its trail, leaving us a gruesome breadcrumb. And it wasn't done. With backup now flooding in behind me, I hesitated, leash slack in my hand. Brutus whined, head turning to watch the prints. I took a breath, the last shred of doubt draining away, because I knew, far too well, that catching up to those prints was how we'd find out just how deep this terror ran, and whether we'd ever make it back out into the night again. The sirens outside grew louder, a chorus of urgency that pressed through cracked windows and rattled the loose papers on the floor. Brutus's whine rose in pitch, and I realized my own breathing had become ragged. Backup had arrived, officers flooding past the threshold, flashlights sweeping, voices sharp and commanding. I raised my hand, palm outward, and yelled, "Hold! Don't step forward until I clear it." They halted, astonished at my tone, urgent, wary. Brutus slipped close, body rigid as a statue, eyes locked on the corridor behind us. I turned back, shining my light down the hallway where those prints led. Bare, smeared footprints, and that single trail of paw prints. A breadcrumb path into deeper darkness. The officers behind me whispered, but I silenced them with a look. "That way," I said, voice low. "Something's moving in here. We need eyes on that corridor." One of them, a young deputy named Ruiz, nodded and edged forward, pistol drawn. I kept my hand lightly on Brutus's harness, heart thundering like a war drum. As Ruiz and two others formed a flanking line, I stepped into the corridor's mouth. The stink of stale rot clung to the walls. The drip of water sounded distant, warped by the length of concrete. The flashlight beam carved narrow slices of visibility that barely touched the walls before vanishing into black. I followed the prints with careful steps, keeping low, every nerve on edge. Halfway down, Ruiz broke the silence. "Sir, there's something here." His beam settled on a dark stain that trailed toward a side alcove. I crept forward, radio clipped to my shoulder, every instinct screaming that this was no simple crime scene. The stain looked like blood, old enough to congeal but fresh enough to smell of metal on damp stone. Brutus's hackles rose again. He let out a single low growl, muscles rippling under his coat. Before I could speak, a quiet scuff echoed from the alcove, barely audible but unmistakable. We trained our lights there, empty space. But at the far end, where the wall met the floor, I saw it, a huddle of cloth. Dirty, stained fabric folded over itself. I knelt, heart pounding, and brushed it aside. Underneath lay a fragment of leather, part of a boot, tread worn smooth. Someone had been dragged here, or had crawled this far before slipping free. I radioed in. Unit 17, victim gear found in secondary corridor, possible wounded or worse. Request medics and CSI on site. But my words sounded distant, swallowed by the chamber. The beam of my flashlight caught something on the wall above the alcove. Smudges, like fingerprints smeared into the concrete. I held the light still and saw that someone had scrawled letters. 4 words in rushed strokes. "Don't fight what hunts." A colder dread crept under my skin. I backed away, glancing over my shoulder at Brutus, who met my gaze with fearful eyes. Behind us, Ruiz clicked off his radio. "We need to clear this with command," he said, voice tense. "This isn't a suspect hideout, it's something else." I nodded, but as I turned back to the alcove one last time, a soft thump sounded behind us. Everyone froze. The beam from Ruiz's light jerked toward the ceiling, where a heavy pipe dripped black water. But then the thump came again, lower, closer. It sounded like a footstep on concrete. My heart slammed. "Down!" I yelled, shoving Brutus behind me. Our breaths caught in our throats. The noise circled us, a single footstep echoing once, twice, always just beyond the edge of light. No figure emerged, only darkness that seemed to pulse with intent. Brutus let out a staccato bark, too loud in the silence. Before any of us could react, a dull crack rang out, like a bat smashing against metal, somewhere deeper in the building. Dust rained from overhead pipes, rust flakes fell onto our jackets. Ruiz cursed under his breath and lifted his light higher. I clenched Brutus's harness strap. "We stick together," I said, voice barely above a whisper. "We don't split." He pressed tight against my leg, panting, eyes flicking down the corridor. The prints continued beyond the alcove into pitch black. We'd never explored that far. My radio crackled again. "Unit 17, command wants an extract now. Medics and CSI on standby. Don't engage further until they arrive." The order stung. Every instinct in me screamed to chase those prints, to see where they led. But the safety of my team and Brutus came first. I tapped my mic. "Copy that," pulling back to warehouse mouth. We retreated in a tight formation, flashlights bobbing and voices hushed. At the stairwell mouth, the bulk of officers waited, glancing back in concern. A medic crouched by a stretcher, goggles perched on his forehead. I glanced at Brutus. His ears flicked forward, gaze fixed where the corridor faded into nothing. I could still feel the pulse of that unseen presence, the weight of being hunted. As we reached the dock's yawning opening, daylight began to seep through cracks in corrugated walls, an illusion of safety. Ruiz exhaled hard. "Sir, I've never seen prints like that," he said. "And that message, whoever wrote it, wanted us to know it hunts." My jaw set. I raked a hand through my hair. "Then we'll hunt back," I replied, voice steady but hollow. Brutus let out a relieved pant, tail sweeping the air once before stiffening again. He nosed my hand, an anchor in the storm of dread. I patted his head before stepping out into the cold morning air, flashing police lights painting the yard in staccato bursts of red and blue. The warehouse behind us seemed to sigh, settling back into silence. But even as backup secured the scene and medics checked the alcove, I kept staring at that shuttered door, at the unseen path where footprints led into darkness. I knew we'd only scratched the surface of whatever terror lay beneath those walls. And when the morning sun finally burned off the fog, I realized the hunt had only just begun. Because whatever had marked those prints that night was still out there, watching, waiting, and it knew exactly where to find us next. Brutus's panting was the only thing louder than my own heartbeat as I stood in the half-light of the warehouse mouth, watching officers and medics swarm around the scene. The sun was high enough now that shafts of yellow light slanted through the grime-choked windows, cutting through lingering fog in thin, ghostly columns. Yet even bright daylight couldn't chase away the sense of being watched, the feeling that we'd merely scratched at the edge of something vast and hungry. I wiped sweat and grime from my brow, tried to focus on the task at hand, preserving evidence, securing the area, debriefing backup. But every instinct screamed to turn back, to follow those prints deeper into the building, to find what waited beyond each dark corner. Brutus leaned against my leg, a living anchor as I moved from group to group, answering questions, pointing out where I'd last seen that aluminum door seal buckle, where the glove had been left, where the first red smear had begun. My fingers buzzed with adrenaline, each report feeling like a curse I was setting loose. The CSI techs clustered around the skid marks on the concrete, carefully placing markers, 1, 2, 3, each tag fluttering in the occasional breeze that slithered through broken panels. I glanced at marker 4, where the paw prints had ended, as though the dog had slipped through a crack in reality. Next to it lay taped-off evidence code 5, the scrawled message in dried blood. "Don't fight what hunts." I looked down at Brutus. His ears were flat, hackles bristling. He knew that message wasn't aimed at a human. It was directed at both of us, in our unspoken bond of instinct and training. A lieutenant came up beside me, clipped-on badge gleaming. "Handler, we've got enough here to process, but Command wants you to stand down. They're calling in a special response team to run the next sweep." I nodded, though I bit back protest. My dog had sensed danger from the moment we arrived. I wasn't about to hand off a hunch that had saved lives so far, but I knew bureaucracy. Once the brass decided, that was that. I managed, "Understood, keep me posted." He gave a curt nod and walked off. Left alone with Brutus beside the taped-off corridor, I removed my radio mic and clipped it to my belt. The crackle of chatter in my ears was a lullaby compared to the silence that roared through that hallway. I approached the edge of the barrier tape. The corridor beyond lay dark, inviting, taunting, a black mouth that refused to close. Brutus let out a single, sharp bark. He pressed forward, nose through the tape, tail stiff. I held him back with a gentle tug. "Not yet," I murmured. But his eyes flicked back and forth as if he wanted to charge in and root out the thing that eluded us all. A young tech standing nearby called out, "Sir, we'll need a statement for the log." I crouched by the tape and spoke into a pen recorder. "Unit 17. Handler and K9 partner responded to suspicious vehicle. Found signs of blood, footprints, paw prints, child's shoe, and multiple threats written in blood. Evidence processed. Handler requests further investigation of secondary corridors. Handler and K9 currently on standby pending special response team. Click. I ended the recording and stood, the weight of responsibility hitching at my chest. Brutus nosed my hand, seeking reassurance. I scratched behind his ears, his favorite spot, and whispered, "We'll finish this, buddy, but not tonight." He leaned into my hand, panting softly, but every muscle in his body remained coiled. We both knew that "not tonight" was just a pause, a breath stolen before the real fight began. A gust of wind rattled a metal door down the yard. That door, locked up tight, would be our only path back in, the place where the prince first led us into darkness. I looked at the lieutenant, then at the team securing the entrance. The special response unit was moving in. Thick armor, riot shields, flashbangs primed. They'd start at the outside and move inward, clearing room by room. But their gear screamed caution, not pursuit. They'd chase shadows. We chased truth. And already their flashbangs cracked in the distance, a prelude to methodical, sterile sweeps that missed nuance for safety. I glanced down the corridor once more. The corridor was dim now, the harsh sunlight failing to reach past the sealed doorway. Somewhere inside, maybe beyond those stacked pallets or twisted pipes, something small and wiry moved, silent, purposeful, leaving prints like a calling card. Not just "do not fight," but "come find me." Or perhaps, "if you do, you die next." Brutus gave a low rumble, half growl, half whine, alerting me to movement behind me. I spun, flashlight raised, but only saw the CSI tech packing up his kit. Then I felt it, the hairs on my neck rising in unison with the shift in the air pressure. The world held its breath around us. The click of a leash on my belt sounded unnaturally loud. I patted the sidearm at my hip, checked the clip, the safety. Habits born of a different kind of fear. A soft rustle echoed from down the corridor, light as a whisper, but unmistakable. Brutus's ears pricked. He barked once, explosive and urgent, the sound bouncing off steel girders, rattling rebar, scattering dust motes in the sunlit shaft. And then, silence. A single, pregnant silence that hovered like a promise. No one moved. The special response team paused. The CSI tech halted mid-step. Even the wind seemed to stall, waiting. Brutus tilted his head, muzzle pointed toward the sealed door at the corridor's end. His stance said it all. It's still there, waiting. I knelt beside him, voice low. "You see it too, don't you?" He whined softly, nose twitching, caught in the scent of something old and metallic beyond the door. An officer cleared his throat behind me. "Handler, the team is ready. We need you to stand back." I rose, leash in hand. I took one last look at that corridor, at the telltale prints disappearing into darkness, at the message smeared in blood that promised the hunt and the fight were far from over. Then I stepped back, leash slack for the first time. Brutus hesitated only a moment before settling at my side, eyes never leaving the dark entrance. I straightened, adjusted my vest, and prepared to watch as others moved in where we'd led them. But in my gut I knew they wouldn't see what we saw, they wouldn't feel what we felt. As the response team crossed the threshold and the corridor swallowed them in swirls of dust and strobing lights, Brutus let out one final, prolonged bark. Uneasy, questioning, echoing with unfinished business. And I realized that for all our training, all our gear, and every procedure we followed, the night still belonged to whatever had lured us in. A deep, hollow knowledge settled over me. This was not an end, but a beginning. The sky had emptied of sunlight before Brutus and I returned, the world reduced to a bruised purple that bled into the horizon. The warehouse yard lay silent under a thin drizzle, the moistened concrete darkening to ink. Our headlights carved twin beams into the mist as I killed the engine. No sirens now, only my own breathing and Brutus's low pant, a living metronome of anticipation. We had 2 hours before the special response team's sweep concluded, and the site was turned over to CSI. My plan was simple: get inside where they hadn't looked, see what they missed. I clipped on my chest lamp and checked my sidearm one last time. Brutus wore his harness with extra padding. Tonight would demand stealth, not force. He caught the scent of rain on metal and shifted, nails clicking against the concrete. I opened the passenger door and let him out. The wet air clung to his fur, glistening amber under my light. I knelt. His eyes were bright, alert. I whispered, "Ready?" He barked once, sharp, affirmative. We slipped beneath the yellow tape still fluttering on the loading dock rails. I paused at the edge of the dock. The shutter door, our original point of entry, was closed and chained. Special Response had welded it shut, a barricade against what they thought could still be inside. But at the bottom corner, one bolt had been twisted loose by rust. I knelt, worked the chain link, and slipped it off, careful to muffle any metallic ring. The shutter groaned as I levered it up just enough to squeeze through. Brutus followed, shoulder first, then back legs, landing lightly on the concrete slab beyond. Inside, the warehouse was a cathedral of dripping pipes and distant echoes. My chest lamp painted the beams in muted saffron. Moisture beaded on wires overhead. Every droplet that fell made a tiny slap against metal, like a heartbeat echoing in the dark. I told Brutus, "Quiet," and he flattened to the floor, snout skimming dampness. Together, we crept forward, moving past toppled crates and shattered pallets, the smell of oil and old blood thicker with every step. We skirted the main aisle and turned left toward the secondary corridors, the ones the response team had flagged as too dangerous. Their flashbangs and shields would never go that far. My dog and I would. I unclipped a compact crowbar and pried at the edge of a warped panel door we'd used last time. The metal yielded under pressure, sliding inward with a whisper of suffering. I slipped inside, brushing cobwebs from my path, and Brutus followed, ears pinned back to funnel sound. The corridor beyond was narrower, claustrophobic. Rusted pipes formed a staccato rhythm overhead, and puddles pooled on the floor in dark hollows. My lamp beam caught the glint of something on the wall ahead. Fresh graffiti scrawled in thick red, "Run or stay." I swallowed. The letters were smudged at the edges, like someone had touched them before the blood dried. Next to the message lay a long scratch in the concrete, deep enough to catch the light. I pressed my fingertips into its edge. Not rust, but dried hemoglobin. Brutus's tail stiffened. He nosed at a low vent cover beside the graffiti. I pried it free. The grill groaned and shook. The duct beyond was choked with debris, but I reached inside and felt smooth metal. Brutus barked once, more intense this time. I paused, turning to face him. His eyes were locked on the further end of the corridor, where shadow pooled darkest. I heard it then, the faint scuff of a movement, footsteps too light for a man. Something, or someone, was ahead. I clicked the crowbar into my belt and patted Brutus's flank. "Let's go," I murmured. He prowled forward, nose to the ground, every muscle coiled. We rounded the corner together, lamp high, and found ourselves in a small chamber lit by a lone emergency lamp, still sputtering orange. In the center sat a desk, one I didn't recognize, its surface clear but for a single object. A small digital recorder blinking red, as though still recording. I knelt, heart pinning me in place. Brutus crouched beside me, hackles rising. I pressed play. A crackled voice whispered guttural, "Tested the reaction. Unit is active. Handler complies. Brutus responds confined. Protocol continues tomorrow." My blood ran ice cold. Someone had been here after the others left, testing me as I tested them. The corridor beyond rattled with a distant thunk, as though a heavy object had been dropped. Brutus's ears snapped to attention. I stood, crouching to his level. "We're not alone," I said quietly. We backed out of the chamber, lamp strobing shadows against the pipes. I ducked a low-hanging barbed wire loop and heard the scuff of paws on metal grating. Instinct screamed that our quarry was moving toward us. I clicked the crowbar free and held it ready, heart thundering. Brutus's panting grew rapid. Every exhale he drew sounded desperate, urgent. We passed the graffiti and scratch marks, steam hissing from a broken valve above. The smell was sharp. Chemical. Hydrochloric? I flicked my lamp to the pipes. One clamp was loose, pipes dripping a frothy liquid onto the floor. My mind raced. The water table here was supposed to be clean. Whoever had tampered with these lines aimed to cover their tracks, or to trap us. Brutus barked twice, low and warning. I raised my lamp and saw footprints in the sheen of the floor, smaller than mine, but larger than Brutus's paw prints. Fresh. They trailed toward a blocked-off vent at ceiling height. A ledge ran along the wall just below. I looked at Brutus. He looked back, then leaped, muscles coiling like springs. He caught the ledge with his claws and hauled himself up, disappearing into the gloom above. My breath seized. He cried out once, short and sharp. I grabbed a crate and shoved it beneath the vent. Brutus's head appeared above. His teeth glinted as he latched the vent cover. I pried it free and climbed up, hauling myself into a narrow duct. The air rotted and close, but I pushed forward on hands and knees until I came through into another chamber. A former storage room now dark, except for a single lamp dangling by a cord. Brutus was there, a white muzzle breathing hard, eyes wide. Before me, spray-painted on the far wall, was a sequence of numbers and letters. 17B-09-RZ. Beneath it, uneven scratches clawed into the plaster. Your turn. My pulse ricocheted in my ears. I shook my head, breath catching. Brutus whined at my side. I put a hand to his head. From behind us, something clicked, a lock, tumbling. The heavy door on the opposite wall creaked open. A faint light pooled on the floor. We stood, dog and handler, backs against each other, facing the only exit. The dripping drip of the valve over our heads was the only sound. Then, a soft exhale, like a breath of satisfaction, echoed from the darkness beyond the doorway. Brutus lifted his hackles, let out a slow, measured growl. I tightened my grip on the crowbar, knuckles whitening. The door swung inward just enough to admit a sliver of light, then stopped. Nothing moved beyond. My heart thundered so loud I feared it would give me away. Behind the door, in that patch of light, something shifted, and then silence. Brutus barked once, short, insistent, a demand for action. His nails scraped the floor in a staccato stutter. I took a step forward, chest tight. The light grew a fraction brighter, illuminating the outline of a figure just beyond the threshold, only inches away. I froze, crowbar raised, mouth dry. The beam of my chest lamp trembled against the corrugated wall as I closed the door behind Brutus and me, sealing us into the narrow chamber that smelled of rust and stale breath. Every stitch of my uniform felt like armor against the unknown, but nothing would have prepared me for the hush that greeted us beyond that threshold. A silence so dense it pressed my eardrums inward, demanding I listen to its secrets. Brutus pressed close. body taut, ears pricked forward. I crouched beside him and ran a quick hand over his flank, feeling the rapid beat of his pulse beneath my fingers. "We're in," I whispered. "Now, let's see what they didn't want us to find." My voice bounced off the concrete, and I could almost hear its echo plotting a reply. I swept my lamp across the room. It was small, maybe 10 feet square, with ceiling pipes dripping a slow, rhythmic patter that sounded like a metronome of dread. The walls were bare, except for the spray-painted code 17B-09-RZ, and beneath it, the carved admonition, "Your turn." At first glance, it seemed like vandalism, but the letters were gouged deep, edges sharp enough to draw blood if I brushed against them carelessly. Someone had meant this as a message, directed at me, at Brutus, at any soul with the courage to venture here. I moved to the far corner, heels scraping against the concrete, and found a low grate set into the floor. The metal was cold and slick with moisture. A glance through the slats revealed nothing but darkness, an underfloor void that could swallow a man whole. Brutus nosed at it, ears swiveling. His handler's instincts told me that whatever lay beneath was why this place had been abandoned, why the special response team had given it only a cursory glance. I crouched and aimed my beam down the void. The light vanished into nothing, but as I watched, something stirred. Just a flicker at the edge of visibility, like a shadow shaking loose. Brutus growled, low and warning. I leaned forward, heart pounding so loud it gave the illusion that the world had fallen silent around it. From the grate came a faint, so faint it might have been imagination, a scratching noise, nails on metal. Then nothing. My radio, clipped at my belt, crackled unexpectedly, the static so loud it startled me. I yanked it free. "Unit 17, status update?" No response, just static. Whoever had keyed the mic obviously didn't want to talk. I killed the radio, letting the silence envelope us again. A stench drifted in, acrid, coppery, like old blood mixed with chemicals. The kind that seeps into your lungs and leaves an image lodged in your memory. I scanned the walls. Streaks of brown-black traced irregular paths, as though someone had dragged something heavy through this room, leaving a map of its passage. My lamp illuminated one smear that trailed up to another vent cover in the far wall, higher than the rest, almost at ceiling height. My stomach knotted. Brutus followed my gaze. I edged forward, careful not to disturb the grime underfoot. The smear ended at the vent's edge, where the metal was bent outward, like someone had forced it from within. I stepped up onto a low concrete ledge and pried the vent loose. It resisted momentarily before giving way with a groan. Brutus paused at my side, muzzle twitching. I wiped sweat from my brow and peered inside. Darkness, total and complete. But at the very back, pressed against the duct roof, was a pale shape, convex, like a gloved hand warped by moisture. Then it moved, sliding closer to me, the metal groaning under its weight. I raised my lamp. The beam caught on jagged metal and wet cloth. A rag, caked in dark red crust, fluttered back as if thrown aside. Brutus barked twice, urgent and loud. I yanked the rag free. It was soaked, unmistakably human blood. Beneath it lay a crumpled photograph, face down. I flipped it over. My breath caught. It was an image of me and Brutus, taken this afternoon during our briefing at headquarters. Him panting, me clicking open my harness buckle. The back was inscribed in shaky letters, "Bound." A slow click came from behind me. I whirled, lamp raised, only to see the vent's underside swinging closed on its own, casting a long shadow that stretched across the room like a reaching hand. The grate clanged shut above us, sealing off whatever lay beneath. Brutus growled at the grate, then at the swinging vent, then at me, as though demanding, "What now?" My heart pounded. I patted his neck, trying to steady my racing thoughts. "Find another way," I murmured. Footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, hard-soled boots moving deliberately, methodically. The person approaching wasn't part of the special response sweep. They moved slower, unhurried, confident. I edged back to the door, lamp lighting our path. Through the narrow opening, I caught a glimpse of a figure in silhouette, tall, lean, standing just beyond the threshold. I tightened my grip on my sidearm, training the beam on the shape. Brutus sprang forward, leash taut, hackles raised. The figure lifted a hand, but didn't speak. Instead, they tilted their head, as if studying us. In the beam, I saw the glint of steel at their side, and then a slow smile curved over lips that smelled of smoke and malice. "Welcome back," a voice rasped, low and cold. "I've been expecting you." Brutus froze at the threshold, stiff as a board, every muscle coiled like a spring. I swallowed against the lump in my throat and leveled my chest lamp on the figure, lean silhouette backlit by the corridor's dying glow. The stranger's smile widened, bones crackling under thin skin. In one gloved hand they held a battered leash, identical to Brutus's, steel clip glinting with age-old grime. In the other, a scratched metal tag, K-9-17. My heart thundered as the figure stepped forward. The corridor lights flickered, sputtered, and died, plunging us into a velvet black darkness pierced only by my lone lamp. Brutus growled, a low, guttural rumble that vibrated through my bones. I fumbled for my sidearm, but the stranger's voice slithered over the hush. "Did you really think you were alone here?" they asked, tone mocking. Brutus snarled, hackles rippling, but the figure only laughed, dry, rattling like bones in a box. I felt the air shift, as though the entire warehouse inhaled. Footsteps echoed closer, deliberate, measured. I took a shaky breath and flicked my lamp to scan their face. Where eyes should have been were two glassy orbs reflecting my light back at me. Empty. Patient. The grin stayed, widening beyond normal limits, teeth too sharp, too white. "Your dog," they said, voice low. "He's special. But you're mine now." The leash in their hand uncoiled, falling to the floor. Brutus snarled, lunged, but the figure vanished into the black behind us with the speed of a nightmare. Before I could react, the lamp winked out, plunging me into absolute darkness. For a heartbeat, I froze, listened to my pounding pulse, Brutus's frantic panting right at my side, the distant drip of that broken valve somewhere above. Then, a scratching sound, metallic. Brutus yelped as something scraped against chain links, a cold ring against air. I struck the lamp against a wall. Light bloomed, dim, erratic, but enough. My breath caught as I saw the leash, clipped to my belt, now severed. The tag K-9-17 lay broken beside it. Brutus nosed at the cut chain, eyes wide. No stranger here, just his handler and him alone. I grabbed the recorder from my belt, earlier evidence, and hit playback. Static, then a whisper. Phase 7 initiated. Subject and K-9 separated. Target acquired. My skin crawled. I spun in a circle as the corridor behind me stretched out empty. The stranger's footsteps receded, leaving only the echo of one final sound. A soft click, like a camera shutter, and then silence. I pressed my ear to the broken chain. Brutus whimpered. I knelt and pressed the tag into my palm, heart hammering. It read simply, property of 17B-09-RZ. I looked up at the corridor's black throat. The tag felt warmer than it should, like it carried a pulse. Brutus's leash lay limp at my side. I had no way out, no backup, and whatever had been here had vanished, leaving only promises. I hooked my remaining hand into Brutus's harness. Together, we stepped forward into the dark, into the unknown corridor where the prince still trailed, and the message still demanded an answer. What comes next, we'll only discover in the shadows. I eased Dixie out of the back of the patrol truck and into the wet hush of the field. Above us, a sliver of moon hung low, its pale light filtering through wisps of fog that crawled across the rows of broken stalks. I clipped her leash to her harness, metal against fabric, and heard the soft jingle echo in the quiet. Every sound seemed amplified: the distant hum of the county's lone highway, the scrape of my boots against the cold gravel, Dixie's breath, sharp and eager, as she surveyed the broken earth around us. "Stay close, girl," I murmured, voice nearly swallowed by the fog. My flashlight beam was unsteady in my free hand, its narrow circle of blue-white cutting through the mist. The red and blue strobes from the patrol truck's roof reflected in puddles along the dirt road, throwing fractured colors over gnarled fence posts. Even the air smelled wrong, sweet with decaying corn, sharp with dew, but tinged with something acrid I couldn't place. We moved forward in silence, Dixie's paws scraping on the ground. Behind me, the engine idled low, and I could almost sense the truck waiting for our return. My radio had been dead for 2 minutes already, static at first, then absolute quiet. Dispatch warned me that communications were down countywide, backup channels were offline, satellite links dead. My own heartbeat sounded louder than any bark. "Find," I whispered, easing the leash. Dixie slipped ahead, nose low, tail quivering with concentration. We passed a rusted silo tilted like a dying sentry. Its metal skin was pocked with rust, paint peeled away in jagged strips. The silo door hung open a crack, and a faint drip echoed inside. Dixie paused at the threshold, one ear cocked. I stepped close, floodlight trained on the gap, but saw nothing beyond the rim of shadow. Her paw caught on something in the gravel. I bent down, swept debris aside, and froze. Half hidden beneath a collapsed corn sheath was a smear of something dark, sticky. I pressed my fingertip against it, the cold smear clinging to my glove. Blood, old but not dry. I wiped it against the sleeve of my jacket. It left a smear, yet still glistened in the beam. I looked up. Dixie stood a few feet away, ears flat, hackles faintly raised. Was she smelling it too? A distant siren wailed, thin and vulnerable, one of my fellow units, desperate for a working channel. I lifted the radio handset, thumb on the talk button, Unit 24 to any. Nothing but static hissed back. I released the button, cursed under my breath. In my 20 years of handling, I'd learned to adapt when gear failed. But tonight all the gear had failed. I clicked my tongue. "Let's go, partner." Dixie moved forward, nose low, tracing footprints I couldn't see. We skirted broken machinery, rusted plows twisted like grotesque sculptures, and reached the edge of the warehouse yard. Rows of boarded-up windows stared blankly in the moonlight. A chain-link fence, warped and barbed, wove between scattered pallets of broken crates. I unclipped the leash for a moment and let Dixie examine the fence line, watching her muscles ripple beneath her coat. Something in the yard shifted, a thump, distant yet deliberate. Dixie stiffened, hackles taut as guitar strings. She whirled, teeth bared in a silent snarl, then darted into the shadows. I called out, but my voice was swallowed whole. Donning gloves, I steadied the flashlight and followed, every sense on high alert. The thump sounded again, closer now, like a single footstep against metal. Inside the warehouse, the air was thicker, damp with mildew. My beam danced over stacked barrels stamped with faded warnings. Dixie padded forward, nose skimming the ground, then froze at the base of a crate tower. A soft groan followed by a scrape, metal shifting. I slid alongside her, chest tight, pistol drawn in one hand, flashlight in the other. My finger hovered near the trigger guard, heart pounding, then silence. I swallowed, voice low and firm. "Police, show yourself." Nothing. Dixie's ears pricked, and she took a tentative step forward. I noticed a faint trail of droplets leading toward a side door. I knelt, traced them. Thick, dark, congealing at the edges. Blood again, fresh enough. My throat tightened. Back in training, I learned to compartmentalize, to see blood and move on. Now I wondered what I'd signed up for. We left the warehouse by another door, forced open, splinters at its frame, emerging onto an overgrown platform. Old loading ramps sagged under rotted boards, wild vines entangling the supports. The moonlight painted everything in cold relief. Dixie's nose was pressed to the ground, tail stiff. Then she bolted across the platform toward the field. I chased after her, boots sinking in mud, breath ragged. At the field's edge lay a shallow ditch filled with water shimmering under the moon. Dixie stood at its lip, staring into the black glass. I knelt beside her, trained light on the surface. Ripples spread, though there was no breeze. I leaned closer, something beneath, flicker of movement. I leaned further, spine prickling. My reflection stared back, gaunt, haunted. And next to it, a second shape, half submerged, unwinking. I jerked back, heart slamming. But when I looked again, there was only Dixie's reflection, head tilted, as if puzzled by my gasp. No silhouette, no sign of life. In that frozen moment, radio crackled to life, static morphing into Sheriff Marquez's voice. Urgent. "We've got movement at the perimeter. Shots fired. I'm pinned down. If anyone hears me, respond." The word pinned snapped me upright. I clicked the handset. On my way. The handler's oath kicked in. I grabbed Dixie's collar, leash slack in one hand, radio in the other, and sprinted toward the field's far edge. Then Dixie stiffened. Her hackles rose, lips curled in a silent warning. I skidded to a halt, scanning the tree line beyond the ditch. The beam found nothing but tangled brush. Another bark, sharp, urgent, cut through the fog. I swung the flashlight, tense, and froze again. At the tree line, where black met black, two eyes glinted back, unblinking, too steady to be an animal trapped in the spotlight. I raised my pistol, breath caught on a silent exhale, each second stretching until a single bark echoed behind us, unanswered on the wind. I vaulted the fence without looking back, Dixie hauling at the leash until a taut jerk nearly wrenched me off balance. The wind-snapped cornstalks whipped at my face as I stumbled toward the tree line, radio chatter spiking with panicked voices. My adrenaline hammered in my ears, drowning out everything but Dixie's urgent panting and the distant crack of gunfire. Branches clawed at my jacket, tearing at the fabric as we plunged into the woods. The moonlight struggled through the canopy, leaving us half-blind in shifting shadows. "Officer down," came the cry over the radio, Marquez's voice, ragged. "He's been hit." My chest tightened. I risked a glance back at the fence. The open field yawned empty, the ditch a pale scar in the dark. Whoever had the drop on us had vanished into the trees, leaving only echoing shots behind. I pressed Dixie's harness to calm her trembling, then clicked the radio again. Unit 24, location? I forced my tone steady despite the panic. The static roared in my ear before a voice filtered through. Approximately 2 clicks north-northeast of your position. I can't see him. Lights are out. It was Officer Nguyen, triangulating on Marquez's last coordinates. I gave a curt acknowledgement and switched off the mic, tucking the handset under my arm. Every rustle in the underbrush now sounded like an ambush. Dixie sniffed at the ground, low growl rumbling in her chest. We advanced slowly, footfalls muted by damp leaves. The smell of pine sap mixed with something coppery. Blood again, I realized, taste metallic on the breeze. My flashlight beam caught a smear of red on a mossy log. I crouched forensics trained in a blink, scanning for clues. Flattened grass, scuff marks, the scuff of a boot sole. Marquez's boots, rubberized tactical soles, might leave a distinctive pattern. I knelt, traced the print with a gloved finger. It led deeper into the woods at a diagonal, toward an overgrown drainage ditch. "Come on, bud," I murmured to Dixie, expecting her to bolt. Instead, she stepped carefully into the ditch, hackles raised. I followed, boots sinking into mud up to my ankles. The beam flicked over jagged concrete walls, algae slicked, crumbling. At the far end lay a rusted grate, half buried in muck. The smell here was overpowering. Rot, oil, something fouled. I strained to hear over the cicadas, a low hum like machinery under the earth. A vibration coursed through the ground, subtle but unmistakable. Running water or something else in motion. I dropped beside the grate, flashlight angled through the bars. Beneath, water pooled, reflecting orange light from some unknown source. I couldn't see the bottom. The glow suggested a submerged generator or a downed street lamp. But there was movement. Something drifting in the water, kicking occasionally against the grate. Dixie's growl deepened. I crouched lower. At the edge of the bars, a muddy handprint, large, smeared. My breath caught. I ran a finger along its outline, pressing the grit between my gloved ridges. This wasn't a curious trespasser or a petty vandal. Whoever or whatever, Ed Marquez was still down here, half hidden by water and metal. The hum grew louder, drowned out only by the distant wail of sirens closing in. Backup was near, but I couldn't risk leaving Marquez or my dog vulnerable. I clicked on my secondary flashlight, laying its beam on the grate. "Hang tight," I whispered, sliding my hand inside the bars. The water was icy, biting through the glove. My fingers probed the mud at the edge until I felt a ragged piece of cloth. Marquez's uniform, I recognized the rippled weave. I yanked free a handful of sodden fabric and held it up. Dixie whined, pacing the ditch's edge. A bark, sharp, urgent, echoed behind us, closer than before. I whipped the torch around. In the tree line's mouth stood a silhouette. Tall, still, blending into the darkness like smoke. The sirens flared through the trees now, headlights weaving beams between trunks. The figure melted backward, retreating deeper into the wood. My pulse thundered. I snapped the radio mic open. "Officer down, a suspect at the north edge of the wood line. I need medevac and K9 backup now." The radio crackled. "ETA 2 minutes, hold your position." I exhaled slowly, ice in my lungs. 2 minutes felt like hours. Footsteps, rapid, light, scraped behind me. I whirled, pistol raised. Dixie leapt forward, barking, hackles bristling. My beam flicked over shattered branches. No figure, no scent. Nothing but the receding echo of my own shout. The flashlight flickered, once, twice, and darkened as the battery died. My heart jolted. No light. Only the moon, wan and distant overhead, and the distant sirens closing fast. I patted my pockets, thumb grazing my last spare battery. I fumbled it in the sludge, slid it into the torch. It blinked weakly to life, illuminating the grate, the muddy handprint, and Dixie's anxious eyes. Behind us, the sirens stopped abruptly, as if deafened. In the sudden silence, something rasped, a breath, a whisper, at our backs. The hair on my neck stung as the voice, low and indistinct, slithered through the stillness. "Help, me?" It felt wrong, impossible through the grate, but unmistakably human. Dixie snarled, each hair on her spine raised. I jabbed the flashlight out into the darkness. The beam caught the soggy cloth in my hand, the grate, the water's oily surface, and at the far edge of the beam, the tree line, empty, still. Then a single gunshot shattered the hush, echoes rolling like thunder through the trunks. Dixie yelped and bounded forward into the woods. I lunged after her, abandoning the grate, the promise of Marquez's capture. Every instinct screamed to pursue, to protect. I raced after Dixie, plunging into the black womb of the forest, guided only by her barks and the ghost of that voice pleading from below. Branches tore at my jacket, roots snagged my boots, and all around the fog thickened, coiling through trunks like living things. I forced my lunging breath into a run, heart threatening to burst free of my ribs. The forest seemed endless, each turn bringing only more darkness. Then Dixie's bark cut through the chaos, closer now, desperate. I rounded a massive oak and skidded to a halt. Beneath its roots lay a hollow, an old animal den, gaping like a maw. Dixie stood at its edge, ears flattened, staring in. The moonlight illuminated something at the bottom. A shape curled tight, drenched in mud, ragged uniform clinging to bruised flesh. "Marquez!" I shouted, barreling down the slope. Dixie bounded beside me, leaping onto the shape. I knelt, chest pounding, and swept her aside. Marquez lay curled, eyes flickering open. His breaths were shallow, blood matting his hair, but he was alive. I fumbled my radio in one hand and reached for his shoulder with the other. "I've got you, sir. Hang on. Medevac's 2 minutes out." His eyes fluttered, panic and relief warring in their depths. He tried to speak, mouth moving soundlessly. Then Dixie stiffened at my side, hackles bristling like spines. I looked up. At the den's dark entrance, something shifted. A pair of eyes glimmered just beyond flashlight range. I leveled my pistol, knuckles white. The eyes reflected back, unblinking, and then darted deeper, melting into the black. My heart stuttered. Marquez looked up, confusion in his eyes. "What? Who?" His voice cracked as he tried to sit. I steadied him, scanning the entrance. No sign of movement, only the echo of Dixie's low growl. The forest held its breath. Far away, the medevac sirens reasserted themselves, faint but growing. I tightened my grip on both Marquez and my weapon. The shadows ahead felt wrong, too deep, too patient. The eyes might have belonged to a stray stag or a fox, but something in their steadiness told me they weren't animal. I forced Marquez upright, supporting his weight. "You're gonna be okay," I said, voice firm but hollow. "We'll get you out of here." Dixie nudged my hand, then fixed her gaze on the den's entrance, refusing to look away. The sirens drew closer. The tree line ahead pulsed with rotating lights, backup finally arriving. I exhaled, tension coiling in my gut. But before relief could settle, Dixie let out a single, strained bark, long, questioning, filled with a dread I'd never heard from her before. And in the hush that followed, I realized we were no longer alone in the woods. I held Marquez upright as the medevac sirens drew nearer, their wail a promise of help slicing through the oppressive quiet. Dixie's bark echoed again, long, questioning, and I followed her gaze to the dark mouth of the den. Half hidden by roots and fallen leaves, the hollow shivered as if something, or someone, had shifted within. I glanced back at Marquez. Blood trickled from a shallow cut on his forehead, dark rivulets tracing a map of pain across pale skin. His breaths came in ragged gasps, each one a reminder that time was slipping away. "Stay with me," I rasped, pressing my jacket collar against his wound to staunch the flow. "Help's almost here." My eyes flicked to the tree line, where the forest loomed like a living beast. The beam of my dying flashlight trembled in my hand. I patted my pocket for my lighter, flicked it on, and held the tiny flame under the lens. It flared, the beam regaining strength, casting uneven shadows that danced on rotten bark and decaying undergrowth. A figure detached itself from the darkness beyond the den's entrance, tall, limbs jerking unnaturally, wrapped in mud-streaked camouflage. I yanked Dixie back, heart pounding, as the shape emerged fully, face masked by grime, eyes reflecting the flashlight in pinpricks of yellow. The intruder's chest heaved, breath coming in raspy gasps. I leveled my pistol, voice taut with command. "On the ground! Now!" Dixie snarled, hackles bristling like wire. The figure stuttered, hand reaching for something at their belt, maybe a weapon, maybe a broken radio. A flicker of movement, then they dropped, hands splayed in surrender. Relief washed over me, but it warred with an undercurrent of something darker. The figure's eyes were too calm, too unblinking, as if they'd been waiting for us all along. I eased the pistol down but remained ready, training both gunsight and flashlight on the kneeling form. "Who are you?" I barked. No answer, only the ragged rise and fall of inhalations, throat working, words stuck somewhere in the mud and sweat. Behind me, the medevac team arrived in a flurry of uniforms and equipment. A medic knelt beside Marquez, checking vitals, while a pair of officers cordoned off the den's entrance. I signaled them to handle Marquez first. His life was the priority. Dixie pressed against my thigh, cold nose probing my hand, as though seeking reassurance. I nodded, then turned back to the kneeling figure. The beam of the patrol car's headlight swept over me, illuminating the suspect's filthy face, dirt cracked, eyes heavy, but with an unsettling spark of recognition, like someone I'd known before this night, someone I was supposed to trust. I cuffed their wrists quickly, the metal clicking harder in the stillness than any gunshot. An officer stepped forward to take the cuffed person, but Dixie whined sharply, hackles rising once more. She lunged forward, jowls snapping inches from the suspect's knee. I grabbed her harness, pulling her back. "Easy," I murmured, heart twisting. The suspect met my eyes and smiled, a slow, crooked tilt of lips that didn't reach the mud-streaked eyes, a smile that felt like a promise of things to come. I cleared my throat. "Dispatch," I said into my radio, voice unnaturally calm. "Suspect in custody. Medic is with Officer Marquez. Send hazmat for blood and contaminants in the den. We'll need photos of the prints and samples of any stains." Static crackled, then confirmations came. "Understood. Evidence team en route." As I spoke, the suspect's gaze drifted past me, into the darkness beyond the den. I followed that look and saw nothing, only the edge of the woods trembling with wind. But something told me the woods weren't empty. The medic slid a cervical collar under Marquez's neck, lifting his head gently. He hissed at the movement. I crouched beside him. "Hang on, sir," I told him. "They're starting an IV." His eyelids fluttered, and he blinked up at me, confusion sweeping across his face. "Dog? Did the dog?" He indicated Dixie, who was watching the woods like a sentinel. I stared where she stared, nothing but shadows. "She saved you," I said softly. He gave a half smile, eyes glazed with pain. "I saw something," he whispered. I nodded, a chill creeping over me. Me too. Behind us, officers led the suspect toward a waiting patrol truck. The headlights washed over the figure in harsh white, revealing a uniform patch on the sleeve. Not ours, but a local game warden's insignia. The suspect, if that's what they were, walked without resistance, shoulders slack. I could see the original cuffs were covered by layers of mud, as if they'd been in that den for hours. Had they been wearing them when jumping into the ditch, or had someone dragged them there? I shoved the thought aside. Specifics would come later. The medevac chopper landed on a makeshift clearing, blades whipping the fog into spirals. Marquez was lifted onto a gurney, Dixie's leash held by the medic. She growled low, eyes fixed on the chopper blades. When the medic signaled, Dixie's leash went taut. I released her harness and knelt, pressing her head against my chest as Marquez lifted off into the swirling mist. Her panting calmed slightly, but her eyes remained alert, scanning every shadow. I rose, hugging my folded jacket to my chest against the sudden chill. The forest seemed to close in, trunks leaning as if eavesdropping on our conversation. I tapped my comms mic, Unit 24 clear. Moving to secure the den and await evidence team. There was static, then copy, Unit 24. Be advised, IT traced some odd signals on your K9 harness mic, moments before you found the den. Full log will be available at base. My stomach nodded. Hardware protocols? Signal logs? We weren't just dealing with a stray suspect anymore. I crossed to the den's entrance as the headlights and chopper lights mingled. The suspect's dropped weapon lay half buried in mud. A standard-issue flashlight, its batteries removed, handle splintered. Next to it, a radio handset cracked open, speaker removed, wires torn. I picked them up, mud sliding through my gloved fingers. Who had sabotaged their equipment? A hunt guided by instinct alone. And what had they been doing in that den? I swept a beam inside the hollow, flashlight jittering. Rotted logs lined the walls, the ground slick with muck. A slight shimmer caught my eye at the rear, something metallic embedded in the wall. I approached, kicking aside debris. A dented dog tag, its engraving half-worn. J. Marquez, K9 unit. My heart lurched. I knelt, running a gloved thumb over the letters. The same Marquez I'd just helped, whose life I'd believed was hanging by a thread only minutes ago. How could his tag be here? The thought churned cold dread in my gut. Dixie pressed against my thigh, muzzle sniffing the tag. I held it close, looking for a maker's mark. Any clue? Behind me, voices called out. Officers cordoning off the perimeter. Evidence techs sloshing in, but I couldn't tear my eyes from that tag. It felt impossible, absurd, yet there it was, proof that someone, something, had been here before us, wearing Marquez's identity, and perhaps waiting. A twig snapped somewhere deep in the trees, too pointedly placed to be wildlife. Dixie stiffened, fur along her spine bristling. I glanced up. At the forest's edge, a shape moved against the darkened trunks, lithe, deliberate, vanishing into a pocket of deeper black. I clicked on my flashlight, sweeping the beam, but found only empty shadows, bending in the wind. I slipped the tag into my pocket, the cold metal a weight against my leg. I raised my pistol again, every muscle coiled. "Dix," I whispered, "look." She lifted her head, ears swiveling. I pointed into the darkness. She sniffed the air, then her nose twitched violently as she backed away, hackles high. A low whine rose in her throat, an alarm more primal than any threat. Behind me, the chopper's blades slowed, the medevac team shouting for extraction. But I couldn't move. The tag burned against my thigh. Each letter a question I wasn't prepared to answer. And in the hush that followed, the woods exhaled around us. A sigh like rustling chains. Dix bared her teeth, a single breath rattling through her throat. Then, almost imperceptibly, the ground beneath us trembled. Just a tremor. A heartbeat of movement that shouldn't belong to earth or wind. I swallowed hard, pistol raised, eyes searching the trees. And in that trembling hush, I knew the night was far from over. A cold certainty settled in my bones. Whatever had Marquez, whatever had haunted the den before us, was still out there, watching, waiting. The flashlight flickered. Dixie whined, pawing at the ground. I pressed the flashlight deeper into the hollow's gloom, heart hammering as Dixie bristled beside me. The dog tag burned in my pocket, its impossibility still sinking in. Marquez's identity here, before he ever arrived, was a riddle that clawed at my mind. Every instinct screamed that this night held more secrets than a simple ambush. I backed out of the den, squelching mud filling my boots, and turned to secure the perimeter with the evidence techs. Their lamps bobbed over roots and rocks as they snapped photos of the grate, the footprints, the scattered radio pieces. I waved them away from the tag in my pocket, refusing to expose more officers to whatever trap had been laid here. "Keep it tight," I ordered, voice low. "Nothing moves in or out without my say-so." They nodded, already talking in hushed tones, reluctant to break the hush of the woods. Dixie stayed pressed against my leg, head tilted, ears swiveling. I knelt and scratched behind her jowls. "All right, girl," I whispered. "Let's see if we can't find the rest of this puzzle." I flicked my pistol light toward the tree line. The forest swallowed the beam, a ravenous darkness beyond reach. I checked the tag again. J. Marquez, K9 unit, etched in careless script. If it had belonged to him before, how? And if someone had lured him here, why leave the tag? A warning, a signature, or a bait? I stood and motioned Dixie forward. "Lead the way," I murmured. We left the hollow behind, the medic's commotion fading as the chopper rose into the fog. I slung my radio over my shoulder, still hacked but mercifully alive, and listened to the distant rotor beat. Backup was assembling beyond the tree line, but I needed to find the source first. Dixie padded ahead on silent paws, nose to the ground. I followed the muddy prints, now half erased by the chopper's downwash. They headed east, running parallel to a narrow service road we'd passed on the way in. I recalled its edges lined with poison ivy and jagged rocks, unfriendly enough to deter foot traffic. Yet someone had navigated it easily under cover of night. A twig snapped to our left. I swung the light, heart pinning in my chest. Nothing, then a second snap, closer. Dixie froze and bared her teeth at the underbrush. I cocked my pistol, voice steady. "Show yourself." My breath smelled of cold sweat. Gradually, shapes emerged. A trio of officers forming a flanking line, rifles raised. Sergeant Alvarez led them, face drawn. "Found more tracks," he murmured, nodding toward a patch of churned earth off the road. "Looks like they doubled back toward the creek." I led Dixie to the edge of the path. Under the flashlight's glow, muddy prints fragmented the lip of a steel culvert. Water dripped inside, the sound tinkling like distant bells. I knelt and examined the prints. Bare footprints, toes splayed, slipping easily in mud. Not boots. Whoever this was moved silently. No leather tread, just skin. "Barefoot," I murmured. Alvarez's brow knotted. "That's odd." He shone his light downstream. The creek's shallow but slippery, hard to cross barefoot in the dark. Dixie whined low, sliding ahead to the culvert entrance. I leaned in, gloves reaching for the water's edge. The current whispered through the culvert, carrying an undertone of something metallic. I cupped my hand into the water. It brushed cold against my glove. I flicked the beam along the walls, scratched runes of graffiti, a handprint in mud, and mile markers spray-painted in a childish hand. 12.1, 4.13. My blood ran cold. The date of the county-wide blackout, the same date Marquez had been dispatched, the same date rumors said the system first flickered. Why was it here, hidden beneath this culvert? A signpost? A reminder? I straightened, voice tight. This isn't random. They've been here before, on that night. Alvarez exchanged a glance with his team. Dixie backed away, body tense, tail low. I knew that stance, danger close. I raised the flashlight to search downstream. Mist drifted along the water's surface. Branches clawed at each other overhead. Then, down the culvert's length, I caught movement. A pale foot emerging from the water, toes curling over a mossy rock. The rest of the leg was slick with mud, calf scraped raw by stones. The figure paused, as if sensing our gaze, then stepped into view. She, or he, stood battered by the creek's chill, hair matted, uniform in tatters. Features indistinct in shadow, but those eyes, deep-set, hollow, locked onto mine. Dixie snarled and lunged forward, leash tightening. I yanked her back, heart roaring. The figure raised a hand. It trembled, fingers dripping with icy water. I shone the light higher. The patch on the sleeve was identical to our department's, the same badge sorting Marquez's tag. But the face, when it tilted into view, was not Marquez. It was someone else. Features bone-thin, lips split and stained, eyes wild with unspoken agony. Eyes that belonged to someone long lost. I swallowed my fear. Dispatch, be advised. Possible suspect sighted Crucible Creek, Veterans Patch. Advise roadblock. Static crackled briefly, then, copy that, Unit 24. K9, backup en route. The figure's lips parted in a ragged smile. It took a step toward us, water sluicing from its clothes. My finger tightened on the trigger. Dixie strained at the leash, growl building. I tried again. Drop the imitation uniform and show your hands. Now. The figure paused, head cocked, as if listening to a distant voice. Then it lifted a hand to its throat, thumb brushing a silver chain beneath the sodden shirt. The light glinted off metal. It drew the chain free, another dog tag, identical to the first, inscribed J. Marquez, K9 Unit, but bent, warped, as if plunged into pressure. My breath caught. 2 tags, one in my pocket, one in this broken hand. The figure opened its mouth, but no sound came, only a thin thread of blood at the corner of cracked lips. It raised the tag slowly, offering it to me. My mind screamed. Alvarez's team closed in, rifles trained, but I knew I couldn't let them fire. Not yet. I stepped forward, Dixie barking, muzzle snarling, and reached out with a gloved hand. The tag dropped into my palm. Its surface pulsed under my flashlight's beam, letters twisting like they were alive. The figure's chest heaved, ragged, unnatural. And then, before I could react, it vanished into the mist. One moment it stood there, offering proof. The next, it was gone, as if swallowed by the night itself. I whirled, flashlight sweeping the bank. No footprints, no sign of movement. Only the creek dripped, a steady metronome in the darkness. And in my hand, the twin tags lay cold and heavy, a question more lethal than any bullet. A twig snapped behind me. Dixie's bark echoed, sharp and trembling. I spun, gun raised, but saw only fog and twisted trees. The tags felt like a weight in my palm that threatened to shatter my grip on reality. and somewhere downstream the creek whispered of unfinished business. I followed the creek's bank deeper into the woods, Dixie's paws silent on the sodden earth. Above us, the fog curled between trunks as if alive, and every tree seemed to lean in, listening. My flashlight cut through the haze, illuminating the twin dog tags in my palm. Identical imprints of Marquez's name, yet each somehow different in shape and weight. I tucked them into my vest pocket, heart pounding. Whoever, or whatever, had left them here was playing a game with us. Sergeant Alvarez signaled his team to hold position at the culvert while I pressed forward alone, Dixie at my side. The prints, bare, smeared, slipping, skirted just above the water line. I knew they led onward, but the forest floor betrayed no clear path. Fallen logs, trenches of mud, tangles of briar. Each step risked losing the trail, and possibly stumbling into another trap. Dixie halted at a cluster of broken branches, nostrils flaring. I trained the light on the spot, a tangle of footprints, both booted and bare, swirling around a mossy stump. Among them, a single paw print, Dixie's own, imprinted in fresh mud, as though she'd already circled this stump and returned. My throat tightened. The sense of being hunted closed in. I crouched to inspect the prints. The bare foot impressions bore an odd curvature, toes splayed unnaturally wide. They seemed to echo human movement and something else, an animalistic gait, a silent sidestep I'd only ever seen in truly desperate predators. I rose, pistol in one hand, flashlight in the other, and whispered, "Good girl, show me what you've got." Dixie dipped her head and padded upstream. We came to a sudden clearing ringed by ancient oaks, their limbs gnarled like grasping hands. Here, the creek widened into a shallow pool, its surface oily and still. The beam caught ripples. 1, 2, then a cluster as if something had surfaced and ducked back beneath. I aimed the light at the bank. Muddy handholds tracked up the bank and into the trees. No footprints returning, only departures. I stepped into the muck, each foot finding purchase only to slip. Dixie bounded ahead, nose twitching at the base of an oak whose trunk bore deep gouges. Long scratches gouged into wood like jagged teeth marks. I pressed closer. Dried blood stained the grooves, gnarled bark peeled back. Beneath the highest scratch lay another dog tag, half buried in rot. Yet again, J. Marquez, K9 unit, but warped as if bent in the jaws of something inhuman. My pulse thrummed like a drum. 3 tags now, one in my pocket, one offered in the creek, one here on the tree. Each mark felt like a countdown, each tag a piece of a puzzle too terrible to solve. I reached to retrieve it but froze as Dixie's growl rolled low, a rumble that vibrated through the soles of my boots. I followed her gaze upward to a thicket above the clearing. There, movement, a pale shape shifting among shadows. I raised the light, beam quivering over the brambles, and caught a glimpse of a face peering back. The eyes shone wetly, reflecting my torch like 2 lanterns in the gloom. Before I could call out, the figure darted sideways, disappearing behind a trunk. Branches snapped, leaves rustled. "Hold position," I called, heart pounding. Dixie bristled, stance rigid. I edged toward the thicket, each step measured, pistol trained on the darkness. The howl came then, soft at first, a single mournful note that rose into a series of fragmented barks and sobs, unearthly in pitch. It wasn't Dixie, it was too warped, too human. It reverberated through the clearing, coating the air with dread. I raised both hands, light and gun converging on the broken aura of the forest. "Show yourself!" My voice echoed against the oaks, but only the howl answered, a broken lament that flared and died away, swallowed by the fog. Dixie's whine tugged at my glove. I knelt, placing a hand on her head. Her eyes met mine. Wide, frightened, but resolute. She was ready to hunt, but I wasn't sure we should follow. Behind us, the distant hum of the medevac chopper faded as it retreated. We were alone again, handler and dog against a darkness that knew our names. Every instinct told me we'd reach the heart of this nightmare, where the final tag would wait and the truth would reveal itself. But the forest offered only silence and that fractured howl, echoing unanswered across the moss. I took a deep breath and whispered, "One more, girl." Dixie's ears pricked. We stepped toward the thicket's edge, flashbeam trembling as it cut into the black. And in the hush that followed, the world seemed to hold its breath. I crept toward the thicket's edge, Dixie's low growl my only escort through the wet hush. The mist curled around my boots as I swept the flashlight beam over tangled brambles and rotten logs. The silence was a scream. My pulse thundered as I stepped into the clearing, heart hammering against ribs like a warning drum. The ground here sloped downward into a natural amphitheater of oaks, their roots exposed and gnarled like arthritic hands. At the center lay a shallow basin, half filled with black water that reflected the foggy moon. Around its rim, deep gouges scored the mud, fresh and raw, as if scraped by claws. I knelt at the lip, fingertips brushing the water's oily surface. The reflection wavered as clouds passed overhead, but through the ripples I saw something else. 2 dog tags glinting beneath the water, tethered to a split chain that disappeared into the depths. My breath caught. I reached out, sleeves soaked as I plunged my arm into the cold. The water bit through the glove, stealing warmth, but I held firm until my fingers closed around the chain. I yanked hard. The basin shuddered with the pull, as though resonating to my heartbeat. Dixie stood behind me, back rigid, watching. Slowly, I drew the tags free. There were 4 now, 1 in my pocket, 1 offered on the bank, 1 twisted on the tree, and these 2 clamoring together like drowned witnesses. Each bore Marquez's name, identical stamps but unique in their dents and bends. I laid them side by side on the mud. The variations were eerie. One tag's letters were worn smooth. Another's pockmarks formed a pattern, like a map or a code. My hand hovered above them, reluctant to touch. A soft crunch announced movement behind me. I spun, pistol raised, and caught a flicker of white, drifting among the trunks. The shape solidified into the form of a young boy, dirt-streaked face peering at me with hollow eyes. He wore a miniature version of our K-9 unit uniform, patch on his shoulder musty and faded. Dixie growled, ears flattening. The boy raised a finger to his lips, a warning she instinctively respected. "Don't," I whispered, voice rough with disbelief. He stepped closer, each movement deliberate but hesitant, as if the world around him had slowed for his passage. In his other hand he held another dog tag, the 5th I'd found that night, dangling from a grimy chain. It swung in slow arcs, catching the lantern light from my pistol's laser sight. I didn't lower the gun. "Who are you?" I asked, voice shaking. The boy's lips parted, and he looked down at the tag. He whispered something I couldn't catch, a name I didn't recognize, then lifted his hand to point upstream toward the farther edge of the clearing. Dixie whimpered at my side, tail low. I glanced back at the tags lined on the ground, then followed the boy's finger. There, where the moonlight pooled, I saw footprints leading into a hollowed knot in the largest oak. The knot gaped like a mouth ready to devour anything foolish enough to enter. The boy nodded once, eyes locked on mine, then turned and slipped away, melting into the fog as silently as he'd appeared. My pulse thundered, breath ragged. The tags snapped in the wind as I turned back to the basin, the 5 pieces of metal calling to me like severed memories. I gathered them one by one, fitting them like puzzle pieces in my palm. The mud clung to their surfaces, but etched beneath the grime were names, each tag inscribed with the same J. Marquez K9 unit, yet each tag warped into a new message, if read in a certain sequence. Help, trapped, remember, alone, and the final tag, unspoken, blank on one side, scratched on the other. Who am I? My hand shook. The tags slotted together. An answer, a plea, a confession, a question. The boy's warning echoed behind me. Don't. Yet I could not leave them here. I slung them into my vest pocket, their weight like truth pressing against my side. I turned to the oak's hollow. The gaping knot stared back, dark and inviting. Something tugged at me, a compulsion born of duty and dread. I clicked my radio. Unit 24 to dispatch. Evidence team, stand down for a moment. I'm making a sweep inside the old oak. Static crackled, then a crackling reply. Copy that, Unit 24. Just be careful. I holstered my weapon and approached the knot. Its edges were smooth from weather, but inside, slimy cobwebs draped like curtains. The boy's face flashed in my mind. Too young to be lost, too worn to be alive. I crouched and peered in. The hollow stretched back further than its exterior suggested, a narrow tunnel leading into earth and roots. Dixie crouched beside me, ears moving independently, listening to whispers I could not hear. I took a deep breath and slipped inside, boots sinking into soft soil. The air grew thick, turning every breath into a labor. My flashlight illuminated scrawled messages on the dirt walls. I remember. You forgot us. We are here. The deeper I went, the more frantic the scrawls, written in shaky hand and animal claws. At intervals, the walls bore impressions, tiny handprints and paw prints intermingled. Then I heard it, the soft echo of breathing, damp and labored, coming from far ahead. I paused, chest tight, listening as the sound drew closer. My flashlight beam trembled as I advanced until I reached a small chamber. The tunnel opened into a domed pocket of earth, rafters of root forming a rib cage overhead. And there, in the center, sat Marquez, but not the Marquez I knew. His uniform was mud-caked and torn. His eyes were sunken and distant. He stared at me with something that was part relief, part accusation. At his feet lay 2 more dog tags, 6 and 7, each identical to the ones I carried but warped beyond recognition, bent into loops and spirals like lifelines cut loose. He looked down at them, lips moving soundlessly. I knelt before him, heart pounding. "Sir, are you okay?" I whispered. He raised a gloved hand and touched my cheek, fingers cold as grave soil. In his eyes, I saw something ancient and fathomless, loss, guilt, and a hunger for remembrance. He spoke once, voice a rasp, "Do you remember who you are?" My blood ran cold. I opened my mouth to answer, but he only shook his head and pressed his chest, where another tag waited under his uniform. Tag 8, the final piece. He held it out to me, blank on both sides. I reached for it, trembling, as the root ribs above us groaned, shifting. Dixie's bark reverberated through the tunnel. I glanced back, and in the narrow beam I saw the boy's pale face again, standing at the tunnel's mouth, head tilted. He mouthed the word, "Remember." My hand closed around tag 8 and everything went black. When I came to, I was outside the hollow, Dixie nudging me, sunlight filtering through the trees. The tags were gone. My pockets were empty. Marquez was nowhere to be seen. The oak's hollow was sealed behind a swarm of roots and earth, as if it had never existed. I staggered to my feet, mind reeling. Dispatch crackled in my ear. Unit 24, status? My voice sounded hollow. All clear. Search negative. No sign of Marquez or suspect. I paused, swallowing. I found nothing. Nothing but these. I held up my palm. Empty. Dixie whined, pressing against my leg. I knelt, hugging her tight. We'll remember, I whispered, voice shaking. We'll both remember. But as I looked back at the oak, roots pressing flat against the ground, I realized the forest had one final secret, and I'd left it unread. I pressed forward into the tunnel's maw, every breath drawn through earth and root. The scrawled messages on the walls. I remember. You forgot us. We are here. Seemed to ripple under my flashlight's beam. Dixie padded beside me, her nails clicking on the packed dirt, hackles raised in tension. My pistol lay ready in my grip, its weight a cold comfort in this ancient womb of the forest. The air grew stiller as we advanced, the only sound the slow drip of moisture from overhead roots and the rasp of each inhaled breath. The tunnel narrowed until I had to turn my shoulders sideways, careful not to snag on the claw-like roots overhead. The flashlight's circle shrank, forcing me to hug the walls and trust Dixie's instincts. I felt, more than saw, the damp press of mud against my legs, the clinging cold of earth grabbing at each footstep. After what felt like minutes stretched into hours, the corridor opened into a final chamber. Wide enough to stand upright, the ceiling 15 feet above, roots curving down like the ribs of some giant carcass. In the center sat a chipped stone pedestal, mottled with moss and engraved faintly with letters I could not immediately read. Dust covered it so thickly that my footprint momentarily replaced any existing marks. I approached, Dixie at my side, ears swiveling toward unseen corners. I swept the flashlight over the pedestal's inscription. In archaic script, overlapping Latin and Ogham strokes, it read, Memoria in tenebris, memory in darkness. My pulse echoed in my ears. I knelt and traced the letters, feeling the grooves worn smooth by centuries of unseen visitors. Beneath the inscription lay a shallow depression, a perfect fit for 8 dog tags. My hand slid to my vest. The first 5 tags rested heavy against my chest. I retrieved them, placing each in turn into the pedestal's cavity. They clicked home. Help, trapped, remember, alone, who am I? With each tag placed, the chamber seemed to exhale, a faint tremor running through the earth that sent dust motes drifting in weak shafts of light. I paused before inserting the 6th and 7th tags, bent into loops, their messages now indecipherable under mud and rust. The pedestal's depression curved to hold them, and when I set them down, the ground beneath me shivered, as if acknowledging that a covenant had been renewed. I drew the 8th tag, blank on both sides, and hesitated. The air grew colder, my breath visible in the thin beam. Dixie whimpered, tail low, nose pressed to the ground. I placed the 8th tag into the final slot. The moment the metal touched stone, the chamber vibrated, a low, resonant hum that filled the tunnel, rattling loose soil and sending roots quivering overhead. Light flared behind me. I spun, heart seized, flashlight shining into the tunnel. The boy stood at the entrance again, his pale face unreadable. He raised a slender finger to his lips. Shh. Then he stepped aside, revealing not just the entrance but dozens of figures. Men and women in mud-caked K-9 unit uniforms, faces hollow, eyes vacant, standing shoulder to shoulder in the tunnel's gloom. Their bodies were gaunt, ribs pressing through fabric. Their breaths came in ragged, synchronous gasps. An oppressive silence fell, broken only by the child's soft voice. You found us. He turned toward the figures. They tilted their heads in unison, as if hearing a cue. Then raised their dog tags in trembling hands. offering them toward the pedestal. Each tag bore a name: J. Marquez, K9 Unit. The same inscription repeated, yet each tag unique, etched by hand, bent and warped by time spent in darkness. My heart thundered. They filed forward, placing their tags beside mine, filling the pedestal completely. The Latin script began to glow, faint phosphorescence pulsing outward, illuminating the chamber in an otherworldly blue-green haze. The walls reverberated with whispers, fragmented memories of lives once lived, distant laughter, hazy commands over dispatch radios, a dog's bark in the night, promises left unkept. I staggered back, collision of dread and awe. The whispers coalesced into a single voice. The dispatcher Catherine Winters, clear and crisp. "We are the ones lost to the silence. Remember us." Then the hum spiked, high and keening, and the figures began to fade, one by one, back into root and soil, until only the boy remained. He stepped forward, small hand extended. In his palm lay my service badge, my own name stamped in brass, A. Reynolds, K9 Handler. I stared, mind snaring on a single impossible truth. These tags, this chamber, the faces of the lost, they had all belonged to me. The boy's gaze met mine. "Memoria in tenebris," he whispered. "You forget who you were to save who you must become." The script above us flared bright, then winked out. The boy smiled, an expression of sorrow and relief, and turned to vanish as the tunnel collapsed in upon itself, roots knitting the entrance shut in a single, final breath of earth. The chamber fell silent. I stood alone, flashlight beam wavering. The tags and my badge had disappeared. The only remnant was the faint script etched into damp stone. Memory in darkness. I stumbled back into the forest, Dixie at my heel. My service badge was gone, my tags gone, the only proof of my identity swallowed by the earth. The fog lay thick across the trees, unmarked by the night's terrors. I looked at Dixie, eyes wide and silent. "Who am I?" I whispered to the hush, voice trembling. Her panting was the only answer as the woods exhaled one last mournful sigh. I clipped Zeus's harness on at exactly 2:03 a.m., the red and blue LEDs slicing through the dense fog like warning blades. County Road 42 was empty, the asphalt slick with dew, and the only sound was the low hum of the patrol truck's radio. I'd been a K9 handler for 9 years, enough to know that every routine call carries the potential to go sideways. Tonight, our mission was simple. Locate a missing hiker reported lost near the old Bradford farmstead. The coordinates were basic, the last cell ping somewhere between a rotting barn and a half-collapsed silo. Standard procedure, standard risk, or so I thought. I eased Zeus out of the truck at the tree line. His paws hit the gravel shoulder, and he paused, head low, nostrils flaring. I knelt beside him, the air cold against my face, and murmured, "Go on, boy, scent's fresh." His leash slackened as he slipped into the darkness, ears pitched forward. I followed, torch and service weapon drawn. The red glow from the squad lights receded behind us, swallowed by the night. The path into the farmstead was a single-lane rut barely wide enough for the truck. Tall grass on either side whispered like ghosts blown by a restless wind. Zeus's panting was soft but urgent. He pressed forward, nose to the ground, tail flicking in anticipation. Every few steps he halted, raised one paw, and sniffed a spot with such focus it was as if he could read the hiker's final thoughts. We reached the barn first. Weathered wood, bleached by sun and rain, half the siding gone, roof sagging in the center. My flashlight beam caught broken stalls inside, sawdust crusted over with footprints that weren't animal. Zeus barked once, sharp, demanding. I crouched at the doorway and caught my breath. A smear of dark red on the stall door, smeared by fingers in a frantic sweep. No body, no gear, just that smear, pulsing in my mind like a heartbeat. Dispatch K9 Unit 14. Blood found on east stall door, no sign of subject. Requesting backup and EMS, I said, voice steady despite my gut knot. Static crackled. Then the dispatcher's distant chatter, voices responding to other calls but none coming to us. I glanced at Zeus, his hackles rippled, tail stiff. He nosed at the gap beneath the door, cold air drifting out in a damp breath. I climbed into the barn, boots creaking on rotten floorboards. The scent of stale hay and rot pressed in around me. Zeus padded ahead, nostrils twitching, then froze. His fur bristled as he stared at a corner where my flashlight couldn't reach. I followed his gaze. The silo's base stood half hidden behind old farming equipment. The hatch door lay flush with the dirt, hinges rusted shut. I knelt, wiped mud from the edge, and saw footprints in soft earth leading to the hatch, then stopping abruptly. No return trail. Son of a... I breathed, heart thudding. I looked down at Zeus. His breathing was shallow, eyes locking onto mine. I nodded, slid the hatch open. A gust of cold air surged up, carrying the sour smell of earth and something else. Metallic, like dried blood. I flicked my flashlight inside, total black. I dropped to a crouch, weapon in one hand, flashlight in the other, and peered down. The darkness seemed infinite. Zeus let out a single, uncertain whine. I forced my legs to stay still. Below, the sound of damp soil shifting, the soft scrape of something moving. My pulse hammered in my ears louder than the truck's distant siren. I clicked on the radio, Unit 14 dash, but the crackle cut me off. Another officer's voice, too, far to help. I swallowed hard, voice low. I'm going down. I descended the ladder, each rung slick with dew. At the bottom, the beam of my flashlight carved a narrow cone through the darkness, illuminating walls stained with old mortar and patches of mold. Zeus's paws thudded on concrete beside me. We stood in a small chamber, barely wide enough for the two of us. The hatch above clanged shut. I swept my torch around. Rusted farming tools leaned against one wall. Overturned buckets lay scattered. And against the far wall, a dark stain soaked into the earth, deep, wide, as if something heavy had been dragged across. I crouched, helmet light catching a fragment of fabric. The missing hiker's jacket, torn and frayed, faintly recognizable by its bright orange lining. I reached out, fingertip brushing the cloth, and felt the ground shift beneath me. A distant thump, like a footstep, echoed from beyond the beam's reach. I jerked upright. "Zeus?" I whispered. The dog was silent, hackles high, eyes fixed on a dark corner where a rusted pipe jutted out. My skin crawled. I swept the beam there, nothing but blackness. Then, from the radio, a distant voice. "Unit 14? You copy?" Relief and dread tangled in my chest. I clicked the mic. "Send it." The dispatcher's voice came through crisply. "Back up en route. ETA, 2 mics. 2 minutes. Too long." I exhaled, breath fogging in the chill. Zeus stepped closer, sniffing the air. I knelt by the jacket fragment, heart pounding. Something in me knew we were not alone. A scrape, metal on concrete, just behind me. I spun, gun raised, torch swinging, and caught a glimpse of movement, a pale shape receding into shadow. I fired once, echo roaring off the walls. Pain flashed in my mind, not from recoil but from instinct. The muzzle blast was too loud, too final. The shape vanished. Silence swallowed the chamber. My ears rang. Zeus whined, pressed against my leg. I knelt, running a hand soothingly through his fur, voice shaking. It wasn't solid. It didn't feel human. Behind me, the hatch rattled. I stood, weapon ready, and hauled myself up the ladder. The hatch burst open at the top, daylight blind floodlights from the arriving squad cutting through the gloom. Shouts, boots on metal. I scrambled out, eyes stinging. Zeus bounded up after me, tail low. They hauled me back, cuffs of concern tighter than any restraints. Backup found no body, only the jacket fragment and footstep impressions leading nowhere. That hatch is sealed now, boarded over beneath the barn. Officers won't go near it in daylight. I still hear Zeus's bark against that sealed door, a summons to something empty. At nights, when I close my eyes, I feel a weight on my chest, like the hiker, or whatever it was, waiting just beyond my reach. Zeus stayed close as they pried boards over the hatch. The hammer blows sounded hollow, each strike echoing like a warning I'd chosen to ignore. I crouched at the barn's edge, torch still in hand, eyes stinging from the sudden glare of floodlights. My radio crackled with voices, officers coordinating perimeter sweeps, the coroner on standby, medics clearing their gear. I nodded at Sergeant Mallory as he approached, flashlight pinned to his chest rig. "Lieutenant," he said quietly, using my old rank by habit. "What the hell happened down there?" I swallowed back the lump in my throat. We got a fragment of the subject's jacket and footprints. Footprints that led to that hatch and then just stopped. I gestured at the sealed door. I swear I saw something moving, something pale, but it vanished before I could get a shot off. Mallory frowned, scanning the barn's dark interior. "You sure it wasn't an animal? A homeless person taking shelter?" "I doubt it," I replied. Zeus wouldn't have reacted like that. He's never barked in fear at anything less than an immediate threat. I paused, remembering how the dog's eyes had gone glassy, almost human, when I'd fired. It was a look that still haunted me. And this dog, he felt it was something he couldn't chase. By then, the rest of the team had assembled. Deputy Ramirez shone her light inside the barn. Deputy Cho secured the perimeter with tape. I lingered near Zeus, who lay down at my feet, head on his paws, eyes fixed on the sealed hatch. I knelt to scratch behind his ears. "Good boy," I murmured, but my voice sounded hollow. They brought in heavy equipment, pry bars, a hydraulic spreader, even a small crane to remove the boards that covered the hatch. The ground workers dug a shallow trench around the base of the silo to catch any runoff or debris. I watched from the side, body rigid, every nerve screaming that we were exposing something that wanted to stay buried. After 20 minutes of clanking metal and shouted orders, Mallory signaled them to stop. The hatch remained sealed, boards intact. They'd decided to cap it with reinforced concrete tomorrow in daylight, after documentation and photography. Until then, they'd leave it alone. Mallory approached me again, voice low so the others wouldn't overhear. "You're not going down there again tonight?" I shrugged. "Won't need to." He raised an eyebrow. "Right, good luck sleeping." His attempt at humor fell flat. I lit a cigarette, an old habit I'd kicked years ago, and drew a long drag. The smoke tasted of metal and regret. Zeus watched me, ears perked. I stubbed out the cigarette on a splintered board. "Handler, report," crackled the radio. I clicked the mic. "Unit 14, all perimeters secured. No additional signs of subject. Scent trail ends at hatch. We'll stand by for cap tomorrow." "Copy," came the reply. They dispersed. Some loaded gear into the trucks. Others scribbled notes in clipboards. I stayed by Zeus until everyone had gone. Then I slipped around the barn's far side, where the boards were thickest, and pressed my palm to the cool wood. Under my fingers, I could feel the slight vibration of machinery winding down inside the farm's furnace system. Mundane enough. But I also felt something else. A faint rhythmic thump, like footsteps pacing back and forth under the earth. I winced, heart creeping into my throat. I stood straight, hand to my earpiece. No radio chatter now, only the wind moving through broken windows and the dog's steady breathing. I crouched to Zeus's level and whispered, "Do you hear it?" He lifted his nose, sniffed the air, then looked to where I pointed. His tail twitched once. Behind me, the boards flexed with a soft groan. I spun, weapon up, but there was nothing to see, only shadows pooling in the moonlight. My pulse thundered, and I struggled to steady my grip. A distant siren wailed, a patrol passing by, unaware of the night's horrors. I exhaled slowly, telling myself it was just stress, adrenaline. A dark corner of me whispered that I'd become the thing I hunted, a man chased by guilt and fear, trapped in a hunt he could never win. I moved away, circling the barn's perimeter, flashlight beam cutting arcs across the grass. Every rustle of leaves, every whisper of wind felt like a warning. Zeus flanked me, muscles coiled, ready at a moment's notice. We passed the entry door to the stall, the one with the blood smear, and I couldn't help revisiting it. I knelt to inspect the stain by torchlight. The smear was dry now, faded, but I still recognized the texture, like congealed iron. "What did you see down there?" I muttered to Zeus. His ears twitched. He gave a low whine. I flicked my torch upward at the barn roof. The moon had shifted, clouds now obscured more than they revealed. A rafter snapped overhead, a branch falling from the old attic. Or maybe not. I tightened my grip on the leash hardware jingling softly. We circled back toward the truck. My mind replayed the moment I'd fired, the pale hand, slick with something dark, reaching up toward that hatch. Something, not human, but shaped like a hand, had tried to claw its way out. My bullet silenced it. But for how long? And what else lay down there, beyond reach of my flash and bullets? As I approached the patrol truck, I glanced back at the barn. Floodlights painted the boards in stark relief, until they clicked off one by one, leaving everything once more in darkness. Zeus barked, single and urgent, as if warning me to look closer. I stepped forward, and froze. In the beam of his noselight, I saw a shape pressed against the hatch, no more than an outline, but unmistakably mobile. A silhouette of a person, or whatever it was, staring back through the wood. And in that frozen moment our eyes met on opposite sides of the wall. I jerked around, but behind me was only the patrol truck, empty and dark. Zeus's bark cut off, sudden and sharp. His leash slipped from my hand. I spun back to the hatch, but the shape was gone. My hand trembled as I clipped Zeus's leash back on. I tried to steady my voice when I spoke into the radio. "Unit 14 to dispatch. Someone's watching us." Silence answered. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't sure who was more lost, the missing hiker down below, or me. Zeus's sudden bark ricocheted off the grain bins as I yanked on his leash, heart hammering in my chest like a steel drum. The barn had gone eerily silent after the floodlights clicked off, but in that silence I'd seen it. A thin silhouette against the hatchboards, watching me. Now, under the weak glow of my flashlight, the barn entrance yawned like a black mouth. I swallowed, shoved my trembling hand into my jacket pocket, and pulled out the last cigarette I'd saved. I flicked the lighter, but the flame died before it caught, as though the air here resisted ignition. Frustrated, I crumpled the cigarette and tossed it onto the cracked concrete floor. "Come on, boy," I whispered to Zeus, voice rough. He pawed at the ground. ears turned toward the boarded hatch as if listening to whispering voices below. I followed his gaze. The boards were plain, unmarked, yet I couldn't shake the feeling something lurked just behind them, pressing to break through. I hauled myself up the ladder and out of the silo compartment, emerging into the barn's musty air. Zeus bounded up beside me, muzzle low, breathing heavy. The rest of the crew had already departed. Only tire tracks and scattered equipment remained, as evidence we'd ever been there. I patted Zeus's flank, trying to calm his jittery stance. "They'll cap it tomorrow," I muttered. "Let's get back to the truck." Outside, the night had deepened. Fog shifted in ghostly currents across the field. I could almost see shapes dancing in the mist. Twisted crop residues, gnarled tree limbs, and maybe something more. Zeus paused at the edge of the barnyard, nose extended, tail flicking. I clicked on my radio. "Unit 14 to dispatch, requesting transport back to station. Timeout." Static crackled, then the dispatcher's voice. "Copy that, Unit 14. ETA base is 20 mics. Be advised, weather's turning foul." 20 minutes on a winding dirt road was a lifetime in my state. I climbed into the passenger seat. Zeus jumped in behind me, jostling into the corner so he could still see the barn through the tinted window. I started the engine and drove off, headlights carving tunnels through the fog. As we rolled away, I glanced in the side mirror, half expecting to see that silhouette again. Instead, the barn lay empty, shadowed, silent. But at the very edge of my vision, I thought I saw the flicker of a pale hand pressing briefly against the boards, then melting back into darkness. I blinked hard. Zeus let out a low whine from the back. I tried to focus on the road, but my mind replayed every detail: the blood smear in the stall, the footprints trailing to that hatch, the unnatural cold that poured up from the silo, the fragment of the orange jacket. My chest tightened at the memory of firing into the void, imagining the shape crumpling below me. Had I hit something? Or merely shot at air? Station lights came into view through the swirling mist. I parked under the tall lamps, their harsh glow revealing every scratch and dent on the patrol truck. I leaned forward, palms braced on the wheel. Zeus hopped into the front seat and leaned his chin on my shoulder, breathing a warm sigh. He'd done his job, found the scent, led me to the entry, warned me away when he could. But now, for the first time in 9 years, he looked uncertain. Like he was questioning whether our partnership could protect him from what I'd unleashed. I reached down and patted his head. "You did good, bud," I said, voice cracking. "Real good." We climbed out together. The station's double doors stood open, fluorescent light spilling onto cracked pavement. Officers in various states of sleeveless comfort bustled about. Some in fatigues, some in dress uniforms. A pair of rookies glanced at us curiously, then diverted their eyes when they saw Zeus's muzzle still flecked with mud and something darker. Sergeant Mallory waited near the briefing room door, holding a steaming cup of coffee. He looked at me, expression unreadable. "Sit, Rep?" I followed him inside. The warmth hit me in the face, but I still felt chilled, as though frost clung to my skin. Mallory closed the door and motioned to the chairs. We sat, the hum of fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I pulled off my jacket and hesitated before sliding out of my boots, the soles still gritty with barn dust. He sipped his coffee, eyes searching mine. Finally, he said, "I've read your report. Jacket fragment, footprints, eyewitness account, and that message you left on the board tonight. You think someone's alive down there?" I pinched the bridge of my nose. "I don't know, but something went down in that silo, that much I'm sure of. And if there's anyone left alive, they'll need help." Mallory nodded slowly. "Forensics wants photos, measurements. We'll get structural engineers down there tomorrow to seal it. Medical examiner already examined the fragment. No tissue, just fibers. He frowned. You're not convinced that's the missing hiker? I leaned back, chair creaking. Number not entirely. Jacket fragment was fresh, too fresh, and the footprints were too deep for a man of her build, like someone heavier dragged something through. I noticed his eyes flick to Zeus, then back. That dog sniffs out anomalies. He never barks unless he senses danger. Mallory rubbed his jaw. Listen, I know this shit gets under your skin, but evidence has to stand up in court. Right now, we've got a smear, a fragment, and a handler's testimony. Not enough to call it a homicide scene. My jaw clenched. You saw the shape I saw. You heard the boards creak, Sergeant. Hell, you heard how Zeus reacted. He sighed, drained his cup. I'm not saying you're lying, but we need hard facts. Scientific evidence, and until we get it, that silo stays sealed. You get some rest. He stood and patted my shoulder. I nodded. Zrenia, rest, I echoed hollowly. Back in my own locker bay, I stripped off my gear. The jacket I'd worn, still smelling of barn dust and adrenaline, went into an evidence bag. My service weapon got cleaned and logged. But all the while, my mind circled that boarded hatch, the weight of possibility pressing on me like the earth it hid behind. Later, when I finally made it home, I found my phone buzzing. Texts from my ex, checking in, telling me to eat, sleep. I stared at her messages, thumb poised, then shut the screen off. I couldn't answer. Someone was down there, or at least I'd convinced myself of it. Either way, I wasn't ready to talk. I dragged myself through the door, Zeus padding behind. He jumped onto the couch, shoving his snout into my lap for a pat. I sank beside him, flicked on the TV, a late-night rerun, mindless action flick. The gunfire and explosions felt hollow, no real weight behind them. I stared at the screen until my eyelids drooped, but sleep didn't come. In the dark, I lay awake listening to Zeus's rhythmic breathing, remembering the smell of soil, the metallic tang of blood, the soft scrape of boots on concrete. Every sound beyond the windows, branches tapping, the hum of passing cars, felt like someone creeping closer. At 3:17 a.m., an hour and 14 minutes after I'd left the silo, the barnyard hatch let out a single, resonant click. My eyes shot open. The truck lights at the station were silent, the concrete there, sealed. But in my mind, I heard the click as clear as if I were standing beneath it. I bolted upright. Zeus was already on his feet, ears pricked, eyes darting toward the bedroom door. I reached for my phone, no new messages. The dark pressed in around us. I whispered into the darkness, "Did you hear that, boy?" Zeus let out a low growl and padded to the door, nose trembling as he sniffed the crack beneath. We both stood there as the silence stretched, broken only by the faint, distant whine of a radio, just beyond hearing, calling us back. And I knew sleep would elude me again. Hunted by memories of a shape that slipped through my crosshairs, and by the knowledge that tonight, the hatch wasn't the only thing left unsealed. Zeus and I rolled into the station yard just as dawn was brushing the eastern sky with pale pink streaks. The rest of the watch had already begun their morning routines. Coffee brewing in the break room, keys jangling, radios chattering in the background. I killed the engine and sat for a moment, staring at the hood smeared with mud and something darker I couldn't shake from my memory. "Unit 14, you good?" Sergeant Mallory called out as he lobbed a rolled-up patrol schedule at my window. I cracked the glass and caught the paper behind the seat. "Yeah," I said, voice rough. "Just give me a second." Zeus hopped down and padded alongside me, head low. I reached over and squeezed his harness, seeking comfort in the weight of his body. He leaned into my side, eyes softening, as if he understood how close we'd come to something we might never explain. Inside, the station's fluorescent lights felt harsh on tired eyes. I peeled off my jacket, glanced at the clock. 5:47 a.m. Briefing was in 13 minutes, enough time to run my own inspection. I ducked into evidence lockup, where Ramirez was cataloging items from last night. She looked up at Zeus and me, eyebrows raised. "Early bird, Lieutenant," she teased quietly, but her gaze flicked to the sealed crate holding the orange jacket fragment. "How's the hero?" I forced a grin, still breathing. I crossed to the crate, fingerprint gloves in hand. Ramirez had carefully placed the jacket fragment in a tamper-evident pouch, labeled and barcoded. I hesitated before lifting the pouch. The faint scent of hay and metallic tang rose off it, too vivid for something under a protective seal. "How's it look?" I asked. She sighed. "EM put it under UV, no biological residue, just synthetic fibers. Coroner says it's dry as a bone." I tapped the pouch. "Could they have washed it?" Ramirez shrugged. "Maybe, but biological stuff usually leaves traces. They ran 50 tests. Nothing." She leaned closer. "You still convinced someone's down there?" I nodded. "Something happened, something that jacket can't explain, and I have a hunch. The silo floor was stained deeper than just that fragment." I lowered my voice. "The prince went in but didn't come back out." She frowned. "So you think the hatch is a one-way door?" "If it is, we need a plan to get in and out safely," I said. "But first," I swiveled on my heel and rubbed my temples. My head ached. The coffee in the break room suddenly sounded glorious. Ramirez gave me a concerned look, but I waved her off and stepped out. In roll call, Mallory paced before the whiteboard, briefing the day's assignments. My name came up. "Lieutenant Ortiz, you're on K9 patrol this morning, routine checks at the industrial park." He paused, meeting my eyes. "But I want you off Road 42 until after structural assessment. Understood?" I straightened. "Yes, Sergeant. Understood." He moved on to other names. I slipped my hands into my pockets, steadying my breathing. Officers muttered good lucks and sorry not sorries. Any excuse to avoid Road 42. I caught Zeus's gaze. His ears twitched at the mention of the industrial park. He clearly preferred barns to warehouses. After briefing, I grabbed a coffee mug from the break room. It sloshed dangerously as I navigated the crowded desks. At my desk, I sat and caught up on emails, interdepartment memos, training schedule notices, and one marked urgent from forensics. New analysis results on evidence from County Road 42. I clicked it open. Results are in. Under electron microscopy, we found metallic particulates, iron oxide and tungsten, embedded in the fibers. This suggests contact with industrial-grade steel, possibly from machinery or heavy equipment. Unlikely in a barn environment. No trace of blood or tissue. Could indicate the fragment was dragged through a facility before being left at the silo. My heart hammered. Industrial-grade steel? A barn silo didn't have tungsten-laced machinery. This pointed away from a simple missing hiker case. It hinted at something, or someone, leaving the fragment there deliberately. Zeus whined softly and nudged my leg. I tore my eyes from the email and looked at him. "You're right, Bud," I said. "This isn't just about a farm. There's more going on." His tail thumped against the desk. I poured coffee from the station pot, black as the night I'd spent chasing shadows. I stood and gathered the day's gear. K9 vest, spare flashlight, rifle cleaned and zeroed just yesterday. Ramirez watched me from across the bay, eyes curious. "You going back?" she asked. "After evidence processing," I said. "I need to know what that fragment touched before it got to that silo. And I need to track the scent from inside the hatch before someone boards it up permanently." She nodded slowly. "Be careful." I clipped Zeus's leash on and led him to the truck. As I loaded gear into the back, I glanced at the station entrance. Officers streamed in and out. Life went on. But I felt the weight of something lurking beneath. A darkness waiting behind a reinforced door. I slid into the driver's seat, Zeus beside me, and checked the email again. Industrial Park, 20 miles from the old farmstead. I tapped the address into the GPS. It would put us close to the missing hikers' cell ping sector and near a disused rubber factory rumored to have shut down decades ago. Perfect for hiding, if someone wanted to conceal machinery traces. The engine turned over. As the truck backed out, I caught one last look at the evidence lockup window. The orange jacket fragment reflected in the glass, stark against the gray morning light. It seemed to glimmer with unanswered questions. We hit the highway, wheels spitting gravel, fog pockets drifting across the lanes like wraiths. Zeus's ears flicked at every passing sound. Tires, wind, distant engines. I felt the station recede in the rearview mirror, leaving behind the safety of routine in favor of a new hunt. At milepost 38, the GPS directed me off the exit ramp onto an overpass that crossed a rusted train yard. I glanced down, old boxcars, some gutted, others tagged with graffiti. Chains clinked in the breeze. The metal smelled of rust and oil. I remembered Cho's report. Tungsten particulates. This yard could have once serviced heavy freight, an origin for those particulates. I slowed. Zeus braced himself, muzzle low. Through the windshield, I spotted a broken chain-link fence. Beyond it, abandoned warehouses and derelict machinery, huge compressors and gearboxes, corroded and silent. A perfect place to explain the metallic traces. I killed the engine, radioing ahead. Unit 14, I'm at the old East Side Industrial Park, Sector Omega, requesting patrol units for perimeter and forensics team to collect samples. The radio crackled, then a voice responded, "Copy that, Unit 14. Be advised sectors Alpha and Bravo are clear. Support en route." I clipped on Zeus's harness as dawn fully broke, painting the yard in cold light. The air smelled of decay and possibility. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of 9 years of service settle into my bones. This was no longer a simple K-9 call. It was a puzzle with pieces scattered between a farm silo and a defunct factory. I lifted my flashlight in one hand, leash in the other, and stepped through the gap in the fence. Zeus went immediately to work, nose to the ground. Every nerve in my body tightened. We were about to chase a scent deeper than any we'd followed before. One that might lead to answers, or to yet more questions. We paused at the threshold of a sprawling warehouse. Doors swung wide as if awaiting our arrival. Inside, shadows pooled beneath rusted beams. The scent of oil and metal was strong, but I caught something else beneath it, a faint trace of earth, of that barn silo. Zeus stiffened, teeth bared. I swallowed. "Let's go find out what you smelled, boy." We stepped into the darkness together, and behind us, the warehouse doors creaked shut. I clicked off the GPS, clipped the leash to Zeus's harness, and took a steadying breath at the warehouse entrance. The early sun filtered through broken skylights, casting geometric patterns of light and shadow across cracked concrete. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of rust and stale oil, just as Lieutenant Cho's report suggested. But beneath that was another scent, faint and elusive, the damp earthiness of County Road 42's silo chamber. Zeus paused at the threshold, nose quivering. I crouched beside him, scanning the gloom with my flashlight. Rusted machinery, blowers, compressors, belt drives, loomed in the half-light, their teeth-like gears frozen in place. I whispered, "Let's see what you've got, bud." He moved forward and measured steps, ears high, nostrils flaring. We skirted a collapsed pallet rack, its steel rails twisted like broken ribs. Zeus pressed his nose to the floor, then sprang forward into the shadow of a massive gearbox. I followed, keeping the beam low. Under the gearbox I saw it, a smear of orange fabric caught on a jagged bolt. My pulse spiked. I knelt and brushed away layers of dust to reveal a larger fragment of the missing hiker's jacket, clutching it like a dying ember. It was torn raggedly, just as it had been in the silo, but here the edges bore coarse abrasions, like it had scraped along metal surfaces. "Good boy," I murmured, sealing the fragment in a fresh evidence bag. But even as I worked, I felt Zeus stiffen at my side, hackles rising. My flashlight caught his silhouette against the far wall. Dozens of footprints trailing deeper into the warehouse, stamped into the fine dust on the floor. Human prints, but not normal ones. Too wide, too heavy, as if someone had walked here dragging something in their wake. I rose, heart hammering, and swept my beam down the trail. It led between two rusted storage tanks, around a corner into an even darker recess. I clicked on my radio. Unit 14, fragment recovered. I have tracks leading into the intersection. I'm following, requesting forensic techs to follow up on prints. Over. Static crackled, then the dispatcher. Copy that. Forensics en route, ETA 5 mics. 5 minutes. If my gut was right, that wouldn't be soon enough. I holstered my weapon and stepped forward into the maze of machinery. Zeus padded ahead, the beam of his collar light bobbing like a will-o'-the-wisp. We navigated through snarls of pipework and discarded tools until we reached an alcove where the roof had collapsed, sunlight glinting off twisted steel. The dust was deeper here, undisturbed, except for 2 sets of prints. Heavier, deeper impressions that vanished beneath the rubble, and beside them the finer tread of athletic sneakers, maybe the hikers. I dropped to my knees and traced a finger along the deeper prints. They were too deep for a human of average weight. They tapered off where the concrete had fractured under a fallen girder. I scanned upward and saw a small opening, just large enough for a crouched person to slip through. The girders overhead twisted inward, forming a triangular breach that led to darkness beyond. I swallowed. "Zeus," I said, voice low. He sat, head tilted, eyes reflecting my flashlight like twin moons. He let out a single, questioning whine. I patted his head. "We're going down, bud." I squeezed through the gash in the metal, the jagged edges cutting at my sleeve. Inside was a narrow corridor of chipped concrete walls, coated in black soot and streaks of rust. The air was colder here. My breath fogged in front of me. Zeus followed, leash slack but watchful. We crept forward, the only sounds my boots on concrete and the dog's measured panting. Halfway down the corridor, my light caught something on the wall. Crude markings etched into the concrete. Symbols like tally marks, 3 vertical and 1 diagonal, repeated over and over. Some were fresh, others old, layers of scrawl, and beneath them, smeared in flaky red residue, letters scratched hastily. "Help me." My stomach roiled. "Jesus," I whispered, stepping closer. I ran a gloved finger over the lettering. The residue flaked off like rust, revealing the concrete's gray surface. It smelled faintly of iron. Zeus let out a low growl, fur standing on end. Ahead, the corridor opened into a vault-like chamber, lit only by a sliver of daylight filtering through cracks overhead. In the center lay a crude pallet platform stacked with dismembered machinery parts. Gears, pistons, rods, arranged like a macabre altar. And nestled among them, unmistakably human items. A battered backpack, a cracked thermos, and the hulking frame of a makeshift stretcher rigged with straps. Like someone had been carried here. I swallowed hard, blood pounding in my ears. The realization hit me. This wasn't a random dumping ground. It was a makeshift holding cell. A hidden workshop where whoever had taken the hiker, or worse, had holed up, using industrial remains to barricade the space. Zeus sniffed at the platform and backed away, hackles high. I shone my flashlight across the far wall and saw 2 more messages scratched into the concrete. Don't trust the blue lights. They will come back for you. My breath caught. I pressed my palm to the wall, feeling the rough grooves of the scratches. The letters were deep, etched with something sharp. I swallowed the lump in my throat and looked at Zeus, whose eyes glowed with a mixture of warning and wariness. I lifted my radio. Unit 14 to dispatch. Evidence discovered. Possible hostage site. I need immediate tactical support at Eastside Industrial, Sector Omega 3. Copy? Static. I clicked again. Dispatch. Do you copy? Tactical support needed. Only silence. Zeus's low growl deepened into a prolonged bark that reverberated off the concrete. I realized with a jolt. In the rush to seal the silo on Road 42, I'd drawn every unit to perimeter searches outside. No one was here to back me up. I crouched, heart racing, and gathered the pieces. The fragment in my pocket, the smeared pleas for help, the improvised altar of parts, the chilling warnings. This was bigger than a missing hiker, bigger than a single barn or a sealed hatch. And now I was alone, down here in the bowels of an abandoned factory, with no immediate way out if things went south. The corridor behind me had collapsed partially, loose girders and concrete rubble that looked unstable. One wrong step, and I'd be trapped. I exhaled, steeling myself. Zeus, I said, voice steady despite the fear knotting my gut. We've got a choice. We push forward, find whoever's here, or we walk away and let them come out on their own terms. Zeus fixed me with a steady gaze, a low rumble in his chest that sounded like agreement. I planted my feet, squared my shoulders, and clicked on the radio one final time. Unit 14, moving deeper in. Stay on this frequency. Do not leave me hanging. I slipped past the makeshift altar, stepping into the darkness beyond. A soft metallic click echoed behind me, like a latch engaging. I halted, heart thumping so loudly I thought Zeus might hear it. And as I stood there, flashlight trembling in my hand, the faintest sound drifted from the shadows ahead, a single, ragged breath. A breath not my own.